My name is Jack. It was March 1951. I was working at the loose steel rolling mill, standing at my lathe in workshop 2, when the foreman rushed in with a blueprint. "Can you machine this part?" he asked. I glanced at the drawing without stopping my work. I told him if it wasn't urgent, I'd finish what I had first. If it was, I'd start right away. He said it came straight from the factory director, so I shut down my lathe and took a closer look. It was a bearing from an American Ford car. Not simple work. With our current equipment, it would need careful, slow grinding. I told the foreman I'd need at least 3 days. He agreed and promised to reassign my regular workload to someone else. After he left, my coworkers crowded around me. They always did this. Some were curious, some jealous. One guy reminded everyone that a mid-level machinist like me earned 540,000 yuan a month. Another pointed out that I'd gone from apprentice to junior machinist in 6 months, and junior to mid-level in just a year. I smiled and answered everyone politely. In this era, reputation matters. I didn't want people calling me arrogant. Then a loud voice cut through the chatter. My master, William. He was a big, stern man, and everyone scattered back to their stations the moment he spoke. William walked over and asked if I could handle the job. I told him I was confident I could replicate the American part. He nodded, then said if I ran into trouble, he'd protect me even if it cost him his reputation. His words warmed me. Since I was reborn into this time, I hadn't felt that kind of care from anyone else. When I first entered the factory, I actually wanted to apprentice under a man named Henry from our neighborhood, but Henry turned me down. So I chose William instead. People avoided William because he was blunt and quick to scold, but he taught me everything he knew, holding nothing back. That's the real reason I advanced so fast. Well, that and my secret. In my previous life, I was a software engineer. When I died and woke up here, something changed. Maybe 2 souls merging, maybe just unlocking old memories. But my ability to learn shot through the roof. I had to deliberately slow myself down. If I hadn't held back, I could have mastered everything William knew in 6 months. I actually wished I could work with computers, but in 1951, that was impossible. The first computer in this country wouldn't exist until 1958, and even that would be made of vacuum tubes. My expertise was software, not hardware, so there was nothing I could do about it. An apprentice brought me the raw workpiece. I thanked him, set it on the lathe, and got to work on the bearing. Time flew while I worked on the bearing. I didn't even notice it was lunch until the bell rang. "Jack, let's eat," my master William called out, holding both our lunch boxes. I shut down the lathe and walked with him to the cafeteria. The loose steel mill was founded in 1935 by the father of the current director, Lewis. The factory had a rough history, warlords, then 8 years under Japanese occupation. Lewis only got it back in 1946 and had been expanding ever since. By this year, 1951, we had about 2,000 workers. The cafeteria was packed. We waited half an hour before I reached the window. The man serving food was Harry, my neighbor from the courtyard. He had a stiff, expressionless face with big bags under his eyes, but he was actually a trained chef, a real master of traditional cuisine. Lewis had hired him personally. "Why so late today?" Harry asked. I handed him my lunchbox. He filled it to the brim with cabbage, pork, and glass noodles. I paid and grabbed 3 corn buns, then sat down with William. William eyed my overflowing box. "That Harry sure treats you well." I tried to share some with him, but he pushed my hand away. "Keep it. You've got a family to feed. What you really need is a wife?" I shook my head. "I'm not even 18 yet, master. I've got 2 younger brothers and a little sister to take care of. Who'd want to marry into that?" William sighed. He knew my situation. My salary looked decent on paper, but split 4 ways with school fees for my siblings, it didn't go far. No parents at home either. Not exactly an attractive prospect for matchmaking. "Hang in there," he said. "Pass the senior machinist exam in 3 years, and things will turn around." After lunch, I went back to work. The imported lathes were old and worn, so even with my skills, I had to be extremely careful. By the end of the day, I'd only finished a third of the bearing. 3 days was going to be tight. Walking out of the factory, I spotted Harry ahead of me carrying 2 lunch boxes. I called out to him. He turned and smiled, then offered me one of the boxes for my siblings. I showed him mine. I'd already saved half my lunch for them. He didn't push it. We walked together to our courtyard, number 95, South Copper Gong Lane. It used to be some Qing dynasty nobleman's estate, a grand four-courtyard compound. The Japanese wrecked parts of it during the occupation. After our army came in, they patched it up into a three-courtyard layout, but the old grandeur was long gone. My family lived in the back court, in 3 rooms of the rear wing, plus a small side room. That was actually the second most space in the whole compound, after Harry's family. People had tried to take our rooms over the years, but these were private property. My father George bought them before he died, and I'm not someone you push around easily. My father taught me our family's shingi boxing. If it weren't for my younger siblings, if I didn't have to worry about the consequences, I could have made real trouble for anyone who tried. Some neighbors resented me for standing my ground, but I didn't care. The only reason I hadn't moved out already was that if I left, those people would grab our rooms the moment we were gone. Back home, I locked the door, went to my bedroom, moved the cabinet aside, and pulled a box from a crack in the wall. I sat on the bed, opened it, and counted the money inside, 23 million yuan in first edition renminbi. Besides the cash, underneath the bills there were 5 large gold bars and 10 small ones. At market price, I was practically a millionaire by this era's standards, the equivalent of what people would later call a 10,000 yuan household. But the money wasn't what mattered most to me. At the very bottom of the box lay 2 property deeds. One was for our 3 rooms in this courtyard. The other was for a separate, private 2-courtyard compound, a whole house, all to itself. I stared at the deeds again, just like I had many times before. I still couldn't figure out how my parents got that kind of property. My father George was just an ordinary machinist at the steel mill. My grandparents were country folk. There was no rich relative I could think of. Yet before he died, my father handed me this box and told me not to open it until I was grown. I broke that promise after I started working, and that's when I discovered how deep our family's wealth really went. My mother had died from bleeding after giving birth to my little sister. My father passed not long after. All they left behind was this box and 4 children. I sighed. Having this much money in this era, I wasn't sure if it was a blessing or a curse. I took out 1 million yuan, sealed the box, hid it back in the wall, and put the cabinet in place. Then I went to the kitchen. Our kitchen was in the side room. I washed a cabbage, peeled 3 potatoes, and started chopping. 2 simple dishes, vinegar cabbage and spicy shredded potatoes. That's all I dared to cook. It wasn't that I didn't want to feed my siblings better. I just couldn't risk it. Every neighbor in this courtyard had a nose like a bloodhound. Once, about a year after my father died, I bought 2 pounds of pork and made a stew for the kids. The moment I opened the door, a crowd of skinny, hungry children from the courtyard was standing right there. I couldn't turn them away. I split the meat between them all, and my siblings barely got a bite each. After that, I never cooked meat at home again. If I wanted to treat my siblings, I'd take them to a restaurant outside. At home, I kept things plain and made sure we looked poor. It worked. The neighbors stopped paying attention. "We're home." My second brother Daniel's voice rang out in the yard. "Go wash your hands. Food's almost ready," I called without turning around. By the time the 3 of them came back with clean hands, everything was on the table. Looking at their thin faces always hurt. I wanted so badly to move us all out and feed them properly. But I knew what was coming in the years ahead, the policies, the changes. If I left now, our rooms here and that second property would be gone before I could blink. "Let's eat." I gave each of them a full bowl. Daniel, who was 12 and in upper elementary school, Tommy, 10, in 3rd grade, and Lily, 8, in 2nd grade. She was classmates with Harry's daughter. "Your cooking keeps getting better," Tommy said, shoveling potatoes into his mouth. It was true. Ever since my 2 souls merged, my learning ability went through the roof. Not just in metalwork, but in everything, including cooking. Same ingredients, same technique, but somehow my food just tasted better. Harry had once tried my cooking and said it was at the level of a head chef. He even suggested I quit the factory and apprentice under him. I turned him down. I only cooked to make my siblings' meals a little more enjoyable. I pushed my portion of vegetables onto their plates, then opened my lunchbox from the factory. 3 pairs of eyes locked onto it instantly. "Meat," Daniel whispered. "Keep your voice down. Eat up." They grabbed the pork with their chopsticks, chewing with their eyes closed in pure bliss. Then Daniel opened his eyes with a conflicted look. "The meat is good, but somehow your vegetables taste even better." Tommy nodded in agreement. I smiled, picked out the rest of the meat for them, and ate the leftover cabbage from the box myself. For me, filling my stomach was enough. Taste was a luxury I didn't need. After dinner, the three of them tried to help with dishes. I shooed them away. Go to your homework. I've got this. Their school fees added up. 3 kids, tuition, and supplies every year. That's why even though people in the courtyard knew I earned $540,000 a month as a mid-level machinist, nobody envied me. On paper, with 3 mouths to feed and educate, the money barely stretched. And that was exactly how I wanted it to look. After school fees, household expenses, and the $50,000 I mailed to my grandparents every month, it looked like I had almost nothing left. That was the story on the surface, and I never bothered correcting anyone. After washing the dishes, I checked on the kids' homework, helped them with a few problems, then heated up the stove and warmed some water so they could wash their feet before bed. Once they were asleep, I washed up, dumped the water, and climbed onto my own bed. 3 rooms for 4 people, each brother sharing one, Lily in another, me in the third. By courtyard standards, we were better off than almost everyone in terms of space. But with no adults in the house, I kept a low profile. Lying there, I reviewed everything I'd done that day, made sure I hadn't slipped up anywhere, and drifted off. The next morning hit me like a wall of ice. I forced myself out of bed, threw on my patched cotton coat under my work uniform, and got the stove going. Once the room warmed up, I heated water for the kids and made breakfast, corn porridge, leftover steamed buns, and homemade pickled vegetables. Simple, but decent for the times. Before waking them, I went out to the yard and ran through a set of shingy boxing forms to loosen up. Then I called the kids. 3 sleepy faces appeared, mumbling, "Morning," in their groggy little voices. They washed up, ate, and I gave each of them 1,000 yuan for lunch. Make sure you eat enough. Tell me if you need more. I watched them walk away with their school bags until they disappeared from sight. Then I sighed, cleaned up, locked the door, and headed to the factory. The mill wasn't far. Plenty of families from our courtyard worked there, the Lees and Wongs from the front court, the Jia family, the Henrys, and Harry's family from the middle court, plus the Su family, the Lius, and us from the back. I kept my distance from most of them. Harry's family was the only one I was close to. I knew something bad was coming for Harry's family eventually. I'd seen it play out in the TV show from my previous life. Harry would end up chasing after a widow, getting kicked out, and things would go badly for him. His son Peter was already apprenticing at a famous restaurant downtown, but the kid had a loud mouth and had already made enemies in the courtyard. I felt sorry for Harry's daughter Rain more than anyone. I figured when the time came, I'd drop a hint. If Harry listened, good. If not, that was on him. I arrived at workshop 2 before anyone else, fired up my lathe, and got back to work on the bearing. A young worker named Frank showed up and greeted me. I nodded without stopping. He watched me for a while, then went to his own station. Within half an hour, the shop floor was buzzing with people. 3 days later, the foreman came to collect the finished bearing. He held it up against the blueprint, studied it carefully, then gave me a thumbs up. Outstanding work. I'm taking this straight to the director. He rushed off. I shrugged and went back to my regular tasks. My hands felt sharper than before, like machining that bearing had pushed my skills up another notch. I finished my daily quota in under 2 hours. I'd barely shut down my lathe when the foreman came back, grinning ear to ear. Your bearing was even more precise than the original American part. The director says starting tomorrow, you're officially a senior machinist. I paused for a second, then nodded calmly. Thank you. Behind me, Frank overheard the news and let out a shocked yelp, and ruined the part he was working on. Frank, do you know how important that piece was? The foreman barked. That's 30,000 deducted from your pay. Have it on my desk tomorrow. Then he turned back to me, all smiles again. I put in a good word for you with the director, you know. Anyway, keep up the great work. He shot one last glare at Frank and strolled out of the workshop. What a bootlicker, Frank muttered after the foreman left. Then he rushed over to me. Jack, is it true? You're really becoming a senior machinist? I told him that's what the foreman said, and I had no reason to doubt it. Man, 70,000 a month. That's almost 20,000 more than what you make now. You're set. Frank shook his head in envy. The news spread through the whole workshop before lunch. People kept coming over to congratulate me until I couldn't take it anymore and escaped to a quiet corner behind the workshop. I'd just lit a cigarette when I heard William's voice behind me. I knew you'd be hiding here. I grinned and handed him a smoke. He took a long drag, blew a ring, and studied me. Is it true? I nodded. The foreman said so himself. William's face broke into a wide smile, and he slapped my shoulder hard. In all the years this factory has existed, nobody has ever jumped 3 ranks in under 3 years, apprentice to senior machinist. You're the first. It's all because you taught me well, I said. He kicked me in the backside. Don't insult me. I've had other apprentices. None of them got anywhere close to you. This is your talent, not my teaching. But I could see he was proud. His skills had been surpassed by his own student, and honestly, that made him happy. I offered to take him out for a meal to celebrate. He refused, said he knew my family situation and told me to save the money. Wait until next month's paycheck. Then I'll let you treat me. Back in the workshop, more congratulations. At lunch, a crowd of co-workers walked with me to the cafeteria, pestering me about taking on apprentices. I dodged the questions. William trailed behind us the whole way, smiling quietly. A fellow mid-level machinist named Sam came up to William. Congratulations on training a senior machinist. I'm jealous. William laughed it off, saying it was all my own effort, but I could tell he was thrilled. He and Sam had always been friendly rivals in the workshop, and now William had the bragging rights. Over in the cafeteria kitchen, Harry heard the news from one of the women on staff. That kid from the courtyard, Jack, he's a senior machinist now? At 17, Harry was genuinely stunned. He knew I had talent. He'd tasted my cooking and said my home dishes rivaled professional chefs. But he hadn't expected my metalworking skills to be just as extraordinary. I could already sense Harry calculating. A 17-year-old senior machinist was valuable. He'd want to stay on good terms with me. That afternoon, I went to pick up new assignments, but the foreman turned me away. Now that I was a senior machinist, he said, I wouldn't be doing routine jobs anymore. I'd only be called in when something required a master's touch. It hit me then just how high this position was. Even the factory director treated senior machinists with deep respect. Walking out of the foreman's office, I felt oddly lost. I'd spent the last year and a half working nonstop, and suddenly I had nothing to do. But the emptiness didn't last long. I already had a plan. I needed to start learning new things. Being a worker was fine for now. Workers had high status in this era, but I remembered from my previous life what would come later: waves of layoffs, factory closures. Even if I'd be financially secure by then, I didn't want to just sit and wait. More importantly, I knew about the coming public-private partnership reforms. Maybe I could position myself for something bigger, but that meant studying. Going back to school wasn't an option. I had siblings to raise, and I'd never had formal schooling before liberation anyway. I'd have to teach myself for now and wait for the right opportunity, like the literacy programs that I knew would come later. The news hit workshop one like a bomb. I wasn't there to see it, but I heard about it later. A worker came back from the cafeteria and told everyone I'd been promoted to senior machinist. Nobody believed him. They said it was impossible, that even the most talented person would need 3 to 5 years at minimum to make that jump. A senior machinist could pick up any part, feel it with his hands, glance at the dimensions, and replicate it perfectly. In their minds, a 17-year-old couldn't possibly be at that level. The workshop one foreman walked in and caught everyone standing around arguing about it. He scattered them back to their stations, but when the worker told him the rumor, even the foreman was stunned. That's when Henry walked in with his apprentice Derek. Henry was a mid-level machinist in Workshop 1, the same man who turned me down when I asked to be his apprentice years ago. When he heard the news, his calm expression cracked. He said it was impossible. He'd been grinding away at mid-level for years and didn't dare claim he could reach senior status within 5. How could I have done it already? But deep down, I think he believed it. And I think it stung. Turning me away was looking like the worst decision he'd ever made. He glanced at Derek, his current apprentice, and his eyes were complicated. Derek didn't have my talent, not even close. But Henry had chosen him because Derek's family situation meant he'd be loyal, grateful, willing to look after Henry in old age. I couldn't offer that. I had 3 siblings to raise. Henry told himself he'd made the right choice, then pulled Derek aside to teach him more basics. I knew nothing about any of this at the time. I was busy walking through Workshop 2, checking on the other workers at their stations. As the second senior machinist in the whole workshop, people treated me with real respect now. These were men who'd survived the old society. They understood how the world worked. Even if they were jealous, they wouldn't show it. Instead, they smiled wide and asked me to give them pointers. After one lap around the floor, I couldn't take the attention anymore and slipped out. Standing in the yard, I thought about my plan. Sitting idle wasn't going to work. I walked straight to the foreman's office and knocked. "Ah, Master Jack, what can I do for you?" I told him I couldn't stand doing nothing. If there were no tasks that needed a senior machinist, could I go learn other skills in different workshops? I could have just snuck off and taught myself, but that would raise questions later. Better to have official permission. This way, if anyone ever asked how I picked up new abilities, there'd be a paper trail. The foreman paused, thinking it over. The foreman thought it over carefully, then gave me his honest opinion. He said he appreciated my desire to learn, but he thought I was making a mistake. Locksmithing was deep enough to spend a lifetime mastering. I'd just been promoted. This was a starting point, not a finish line. Even among senior machinists, there were levels. He wanted me to keep sharpening my craft, not scatter my energy across different skills. I understood what he really meant. To him, I was his workshop's prized asset. If I started learning other trades, I might get poached by another department. He didn't want that. I looked him in the eye, nodded, and said he was right, that I hadn't thought it through. Then I walked out. But I didn't agree. He just didn't know I had a cheat. I could master things far faster than any normal person. Still, pushing the issue wouldn't help. I'd find another way. After work, I asked old Wong from the front courtyard to let my siblings know I'd be late, then took a bus to the Anong Market used bookshops. The old book district was famous, stalls packed together selling everything from ancient texts to foreign literature, textbooks, magazines, and manuals. The place was crowded. I moved through the rows slowly, scanning shelves. I wasn't in a rush. "Jack, you come here to hunt for books too?" I turned and saw Leo, a co-worker from my workshop. We got along well. We'd often discussed metalworking techniques together. He pointed to a stall nearby that had some machinist manuals and suggested we look together. I went along with him. The books there were detailed and useful. Then I spotted what I'd really come for, a few technical manuals on electrical work and mechanical design. My heart jumped. "How much for these?" I asked the stall owner. 30,000 each. I winced. That was steep. I stood there thinking. The books were exactly what I needed, but I didn't want to get ripped off either. Leo noticed my hesitation and asked what was wrong. I told him the price. He frowned too and suggested we keep looking. We circled the whole market without finding anything better. I was starting to feel discouraged when we passed a small, easy-to-miss stall in a corner. I glanced over and spotted an old machinist manual with a worn cover, but a title that caught my eye. I picked it up and flipped through. The content was excellent, full of practical tips and real-world experience. "How much?" 25,000. Still not cheap, but better. Before I could pay, Leo stepped in and bargained with the owner. "Can you do a little less? If you give us a better price, we'll buy several." The stall owner thought about it, then nodded. 20,000. Leo and I each picked out several books and paid happily. Walking away with an armful of manuals on machining, electrical work, and mechanical design, I felt genuinely excited. These books were going to be the foundation for everything I planned to learn next. We said goodbye at the bus stop, and I rode home. By the time I got home, it was already getting dark. As I walked through the front courtyard, a thin man in a mouse suit was watering flowers by the gate, his eyes fixed on the entrance. That was Edgar, the schoolteacher from the front court. He wore glasses and had a bookish look about him. The moment he saw me, his eyes lit up. "Jack, I heard you made senior machinist today. Is it true?" I was still in a good mood from the bookshop, but his sudden approach annoyed me. I nodded politely, said, "Evening, Uncle Edgar," and kept walking. He tried to say something more, but I was already gone. I heard him mutter behind me about my lack of manners. The truth was, when my father George died, Edgar had been afraid our family would become a burden, so he kept his distance and never said a fair word on our behalf. Now that I was somebody, he wanted to make friends. Too late. Cutting through the middle courtyard, I noticed a shadow dart across the window of the east wing room. I ignored it and headed straight to the back. Lily was sitting alone by our door. "Where have you been?" she cried, jumping up and running toward me on her little legs. I caught her and bumped my forehead gently against hers. "Have you all eaten? Daniel can't cook and I'm too small." "I'm starving." I felt guilty immediately. I asked where Daniel and Tommy were. She said they'd gone to play at Martin's place. That was the Sioux family's son, who lived in the back court. Despite his reputation in the stories I remembered from my previous life, in reality Martin wasn't so bad. He was actually quite sharp with people and got along well with Daniel. They were in the same class at school. I carried Lily inside, set my new books on the desk, and went straight to the kitchen. Soon the sound of chopping and sizzling filled the air. Lily sat at the table with her chin in her hands, eyes glued to the kitchen door, practically drooling. "Get the bowls out," I called. She scrambled to set the table. I brought out sesame sauce cabbage and stir-fried potato slices. Lily's eyes went wide. She stuffed a bite in her mouth and mumbled that it was delicious. I sent her to fetch her brothers. Daniel and Tommy came running back, grinning. "What smells so good?" Daniel asked before he was even through the door. We sat together, and I kept putting food on their plates while asking about school. It was warm and easy, the kind of evening that made everything else worth it. After dinner, I washed up and sent them to do homework. Once they were done and tucked into bed, I finally sat down at my desk, lit an oil lamp, and opened my new books. The machinist manual was useful as reference, a way to deepen the foundation of what I already knew. But the books on electrical work and mechanical design were what really mattered. Those were my future. I read late into the night, underlining passages, making notes in the margins, stopping now and then to think. The courtyard went silent around me. Everyone was asleep. But I kept reading, because I knew that becoming the kind of person I wanted to be in this era would take more than just one skill. That night, across the courtyard in the middle court, Henry couldn't sleep. He lay in bed tossing and turning, replaying what the workshop one foreman had told him. He kept thinking about the day I'd asked to be his apprentice, and how he'd turned me down. In just a year and a half, I'd gone from apprentice to senior machinist. Meanwhile, his own student Derek couldn't even figure out a basic part after the same amount of time. It ate at him. Derek seemed smarter and quicker on the surface, yet the gap in actual skill was enormous. Henry's wife Margaret woke up and asked what was wrong. He told her it was nothing. He couldn't bring himself to explain the calculations he'd made back then, choosing Derek over me because Derek would be loyal, grateful, useful in old age. He stared at the moonlight through the window and finally convinced himself he hadn't been wrong. "It's not my fault," he muttered. "That kid is just a freak of nature." Then he fell asleep. The next morning, I followed my routine, emptied the chamber pot, lit the stove, made breakfast, practiced my shingy boxing in the yard, then woke the kids and sent them to school. Once they were gone, I packed the books I hadn't finished the night before into my bag and walked to the factory. Along the way, workers kept greeting me cheerfully. "Morning, Master Jack." It felt strange. I wasn't used to this kind of attention, but I smiled and greeted everyone back. I got to workshop 2 expecting to be the first one there, but a few apprentices were already working. They straightened up when they saw me. I sat down at my station, picked up a workpiece, and started practicing, testing the techniques I'd read about the night before against real metal. Something clicked. My hands moved almost on their own, smooth and fluid, each motion flowing into the next. Ideas sparked in my mind as I worked, and I kept adjusting, refining. The apprentices were staring, wide-eyed. They knew enough to recognize that what looked simple was actually incredibly difficult. I finished the piece, measured it. Dimensions and precision were perfect. I closed my eyes, reviewed the process in my head, then picked up another workpiece and did it again. Half an hour later, I completed several parts, all meeting specifications. The apprentices couldn't contain themselves. "Master Jack, you're amazing." I told them it was just practice, that anyone could do it with enough repetition. They didn't buy that for a second. Then one of them gathered his courage. "Would you take on apprentices?" I paused. I understood the hunger in his eyes. I remembered what it felt like to want desperately to learn. But I was only 17. Every apprentice in this shop was older than me, and I had high standards. I cared about character as much as talent. I wasn't going to risk training someone who'd turn ungrateful. "I won't take apprentices," I said, "but you're welcome to watch me work. If you have questions, I'll answer them." That was enough to make them ecstatic. They crowded around as I demonstrated machining steps, explaining my process as I went. Some of the tips I shared were more detailed and easier to understand than what their own masters had taught them. Soon regular workers started gathering too, listening in. The morning bell rang, and I stopped. Everyone thanked me and reluctantly went back to their stations. That's when William walked over with a serious look. "So you're playing teacher now?" I scratched my head sheepishly. He cut straight to the point. Every one of those workers already had a master. If their masters found out I was teaching their apprentices, it could cause real resentment. In this era, the master-apprentice bond was sacred. What I'd done, however well-intentioned, could be seen as overstepping. It hit me like cold water. He was absolutely right. I'd been careless. I nodded and promised him I wouldn't do it again. After William went back to his station, I stood there thinking. I needed to be more careful. In this time and place, sharing skills freely wasn't generosity. It was a potential insult to every master in the shop. From now on, I'd keep my knowledge to myself unless specifically asked by someone without a master, or unless the situation truly called for it. After that lesson, I pulled back and spent the rest of the morning reading quietly in a corner of the workshop. The foreman had no tasks for me, so I buried myself in my books. At lunch, William sat down across from me looking worried. He thought maybe he'd been too harsh that morning. I shook my head and told him he'd been right. I was the one who'd been careless. That relieved him. He noticed my book and asked if I was studying for school. I pulled out the machinist manual I'd bought at the Anong bookshop and handed it to him. He flipped through it, eyes widening. Some of the techniques described gave him genuine breakthroughs in his own thinking. "This is excellent," he said. "Study it well." Then his expression darkened. "The truth is, I can't keep up with you anymore. You've outgrown anything I can teach." I opened my mouth to comfort him, but couldn't find the words. I just stood there, flustered. William laughed at my helplessness. He knew I was never good with words. He patted my shoulder. "Just remember I'm your master." "That's enough. I'll never forget," I said. After lunch, I went back to my corner and read until William's voice pulled me out. Time to go home. I'd lost track of time completely. Walking into the courtyard, neighbors greeted me warmly. Another thing I wasn't used to yet. I nodded back and headed straight to the rear court. From the middle courtyard, I could hear a commotion, but I ignored it and went inside to put down my bag. I started making dinner, mixed flour dough for steamed buns. The noise from the middle court kept growing louder. Then a lanky teenager with a long face came sprinting into the back court. That was Martin. Right behind him was another boy, older looking, chasing and cursing. "Martin, you little punk, stand still. Who are you calling stupid? Whoever answers to it." The chaser was Peter, Harry's son. I'd heard about him, but never actually met him in the 2 years I'd lived here. Harry had sent him to apprentice at a famous restaurant downtown years ago. He must have been home on a break. I did some mental math. If the timeline I remembered from the TV show was right, Harry would run off with a widow by the end of this year. Peter had been apprenticing for 2 years now. One more, and he'd have been promoted to a proper cook. If Henry hadn't meddled in the original story, Peter could have stayed at that restaurant and supported himself and his little sister Rain just fine. Why he'd eventually end up leaving to work at the steel mill as a mere apprentice, I could only guess Henry had something to do with it. But that wasn't my problem. The courtyard crowd loved the show. People leaned out of doorways shouting encouragement to both sides. "Peter, throw a stick at him. Martin, stand and fight like a man." Nobody wanted peace. They wanted entertainment. Then Harry's voice boomed across the yard. "Peter, get back here." Peter stopped dead. He glared at Martin's retreating back. "You wait. I'll settle this later." Martin caught his breath and spat after him. "Idiot. I'm not scared of you." Then Martin noticed me standing by the kitchen with my steamed buns. He straightened up. "Hey, Jack, aren't you home early? School doesn't let out until 5. His eyes shifted. I felt sick, so I asked for the afternoon off. I could tell from his darting eyes he'd just skipped class, but it wasn't my business. I gave him a half-smile. "Sick, huh? Sick enough to run laps around the courtyard?" He had the decency to look embarrassed for half a second before launching into a rant about Peter. "Everyone calls him Stupid Pete, but when I say it, he chases me. It's not fair. And he is stupid. I'm just telling the truth." I shook my head. "If you know you can't beat him in a fight, why do you keep poking him?" It genuinely puzzled me. Peter had been away for 2 years. Whatever grudge they'd had should have faded. But no, the moment they saw each other, it was like magnets repelling. Some people, I suppose, are just born to be each other's headaches. Martin sneered when I asked why he kept provoking Peter. "I just can't stand his smug face. He acts all high and mighty when he's clearly an idiot." His eyes flashed with genuine contempt. I gave up trying to reason with him. Let those two tear each other apart. It wasn't my problem. "We're home," Daniel's voice rang out, and my 3 siblings came walking into the back court with their school bags. Lily spotted me and broke into a run on her little legs. "Careful." I caught her and tapped her nose. "What if you fall?" she giggled. "I knew you'd catch me." I sent Daniel and Tommy to wash their hands, then invited Martin to stay for dinner. He politely declined and ran home. I carried Lily into the kitchen and got to work. "What are we eating tonight?" Daniel and Tommy appeared in the doorway. "Steamed buns and dumpling soup." Lily's face lit up. "I love your dumpling soup." Tommy chimed in too. I shooed all three out of the kitchen and started cooking. Dumpling soup, or rather, batter drop soup, the northern style, had been my favorite thing to make in my previous life, even when my cooking was mediocre. Now, with my enhanced abilities, I had it done in minutes. For steaming bowls hit the table. The kids devoured everything. Lily declared it the best soup ever. I smiled and ate my own bowl. I couldn't give them meat regularly without attracting attention, but I'd figured out ways to make simple, cheap food taste wonderful. That's why all three had grown noticeably taller over the past year. After cleaning up, I sat at the desk with my books while the kids did homework beside me. The room went quiet, just 4 people reading and studying together. It was peaceful. I'd mostly absorbed the machinist manual already, so I moved on to the mechanical design book. This was harder territory. Machining was about precision on individual parts. Mechanical design was about whole systems, how forces transfer, how components interact, what materials to use. The two fields barely overlapped, except that the parts a machinist makes are what bring a design to life. Compared to my machinist books, the design text was a struggle. But compared to a normal person, I was still learning at a frightening pace. My enhanced understanding kept kicking in, and concepts that seemed dense at first gradually became clear. When the light faded, I looked up and realized it was dark outside. The kids were still studying. They'd picked up the habit from watching me. Every night after homework, they'd review their textbooks on their own. I'd never forced them into it. They just started copying what I did, and now it was automatic. A good habit, and I made sure to praise them for it. I answered a few of their questions, heated water for them to wash their feet, and sent them to bed. Lying on my bed afterward, I finally had time to think. I reviewed everything that had happened over the past few days and identified 2 real mistakes. First, teaching those apprentices. In my previous life, sharing knowledge was normal, encouraged, even. But this era was different. The master-apprentice system was sacred. What I'd done might have earned the apprentice's gratitude, but it would have made enemies of every master in the workshop. If William hadn't stopped me, I could have ended up isolated. Second, asking the foreman to let me learn other skills. From my perspective, it made perfect sense. From his, it was a threat. My value to him was my machinist ability. If I'd asked to deepen my craft, he'd have said yes instantly. But asking to branch out meant he'd have to call in favors from other departments for zero benefit to himself. No upside for him meant no deal. Both mistakes came from the same root. I was still thinking like someone from the future. I'd been too casual, too open, assuming this world worked like the one I remembered. It didn't. I lay there in the dark and made myself a rule. Watch more, say less, think before acting. Be cautious. Be more cautious. Then be cautious again. With that settled, I closed my eyes and fell asleep. I woke in the middle of the night, shivering. The stove had gone out and the wind was howling outside. I tried to go back to sleep, but the cold cut right through me. I got up, lit the kerosene lamp, and immediately went to check on the kids. Daniel and Tommy were fine, curled up together under their blanket, keeping each other warm. But when I opened Lily's door, my heart nearly broke. She was huddled in the corner, trembling, whispering in her sleep, "Mama, I'm cold." So cold. I scooped her up with her blanket, carried her to my bed, and covered her with both her quilt and mine. Then I went out into the freezing yard, grabbed an armload of firewood, and got the stove going again. When I came back, her breathing had steadied and her body had relaxed. I touched her forehead. No fever. I exhaled. Sitting there in the dim light, I looked around our home. Bare walls. One cabinet. A chair. A desk. That was it. The blankets were so thin I could almost see through them. The kids' clothes hadn't been replaced in 2 years. I slapped myself. What had I been doing? I'd spent all my energy on improving my craft and figuring out meals, but I'd neglected the basics. My family had money hidden in the wall. We weren't actually poor. I'd been putting on a show of poverty to avoid the neighbors' attention, but my siblings were paying the price. They were growing children. Cold and thin blankets weren't just uncomfortable, they were dangerous. I made a decision right there. Enough pretending. The kids' health came first. When daylight came, I'd take them shopping for new clothes, new bedding, and proper furniture. Let the neighbors think what they want. Dawn broke. I went to the kitchen and, for the first time in a long while, scooped out pure white flour instead of the usual mixed grain. I shaped proper white flour steamed buns and put them in the steamer. Then I cracked 2 eggs into boiling water with salt and a drop of oil. The rich smell of egg soup drifted through the courtyard. In the back court, Robert's wife Rose caught the scent and swallowed hard. "Who's eating this well so early?" Their son sniffed the air and said it was coming from our place. Robert, a mid-level machinist himself, shrugged it off, saying I'd just been promoted and was probably celebrating. Rose shook her head in wonder. 2 years ago, nobody gave our family a chance. After my father George died, a local thug named Chien tried to seize our rooms. I beat him so badly his gang came back the next day for revenge, and I beat all of them too. Only stopped because the old grandmother begged me. After that, the whole courtyard kept their distance. They were ashamed they hadn't helped, and afraid I might hold a grudge. Only Harry's family and Martin's family still talked to us. I called the kids for breakfast. Daniel, Tommy, and Lily stumbled out. Lily looked up at me with watery eyes. "I was in my own bed last night, but I woke up in yours." Her lip quivered. "And I wet the bed. Your blanket got wet too." She burst into tears. I picked her up and wiped her face. "That's it. That's nothing. Don't cry. Listen, today I'm taking all of you out to buy new blankets and new clothes. How about that?" Tommy's eyes went wide. "Really? New clothes? Really? Now go inside. It's cold out here. Daniel, help me carry the food." Daniel stared at the steamer full of white flour buns. "Are you crazy? You used all the white flour? We haven't had these since Dad died." I smacked the back of his head and laughed. "Your brother is a senior machinist now, making over $700,000 a month. You think we can't afford white flour buns? $70,000? Daniel's eyes went wide. "Our father had only made $350,000 a month. I was earning double that now. Really, really. Now stop talking and carry the buns inside. We've got things to do after breakfast." I laid everything out: 4 bowls of egg soup, a plate of greens, shredded potatoes, and a basket of pure white steamed buns. Lily's eyes lit up like stars. "They're so white." I rubbed her head and told everyone to eat up. We had shopping to do. After cleaning the dishes, I locked up and led the kids out through the courtyard. Harry was sitting by his door, half dozing. He opened his eyes when he heard us. "Where are you all headed?" "Taking them to buy clothes. Theirs don't fit anymore." He smiled. "Look at you. All grown up, taking care of your family." I thanked him and we moved on. In the front court, we heard screaming from Edgar's house. Then Edgar came rushing out, yelling for old Wu to lend him his cart. His wife was in labor. I thought to myself, so Edgar's 3rd child is about to be born. I wondered if Edgar would start turning into the penny-pinching miser I remembered from the show. But I didn't stop walking. 3 alleys over, I found the tailor shop my father used to take us to. The place was small, but the work was excellent, better than most store-bought clothes. "Andy Wong," I called from the doorway. A middle-aged woman in a floral padded jacket came out and recognized us immediately. I told her I needed 2 outfits each for the 3 kids. She looked at me with soft eyes and asked why I wasn't getting any for myself. "I've got my work uniform." "That's enough." She sighed and said I had it tough, but she understood. She took the kids inside to measure them, then came back with the price: $300,000 total for 6 outfits. $10,000 down, the rest on pickup. $300,000. $5,000 per outfit. I winced inside, but paid the deposit. 5 days until they'd be ready. Outside the shop, I stood on the street wondering where to take the kids next. I didn't know the city well, not in this life or my previous one. Then I remembered Shikahai Lake. It showed up constantly in stories set in this era, and it wasn't far from our lane. Half an hour later, we arrived. I was a little disappointed. There was no scenery to speak of, just a big lake with railings around it, still partly frozen. Some people were fishing. Kids were skating on the ice, their laughter ringing across the water. "Can we skate too?" Daniel asked, his eyes full of longing. I almost said no, too dangerous. But I looked at his face and couldn't do it. Tommy and Lily immediately jumped in. "Me too. Me too." I poked both their foreheads. "Fine. All of you." I rented 3 pairs of skates for 3,000 yuan from a stall by the shore. I laced up the kids' skates and followed behind them on the ice with my arms spread wide, ready to catch anyone who fell. They wobbled and swayed, and my heart was in my throat the whole time. But they figured it out fast. Within minutes they had their balance, gliding carefully at first, then faster and faster, zooming past my reach. I panicked and nearly called them back, but their laughter stopped me. I just walked faster, staying as close as I could. When I noticed their energy flagging, I called out, "Time to go." They protested a little but obeyed. We returned the skates and left Shikahai, the kids still flushed and grinning. We'd barely left Shikahai when Lily's little voice piped up. "I'm hungry." I looked at her big, pleading eyes and melted. I picked her up and asked the boys what they wanted to eat. Daniel, ever the responsible one, said anything was fine. Tommy blurted out, "Roast duck." Daniel glared at him. "Do you know how much roast duck costs?" "You think money grows on trees." Tommy's face crumpled. He looked down and mumbled, "Never mind, I don't need it." Lily hugged my neck. "I don't even like duck. I like your cooking better, big brother." I ruffled Tommy's hair. "Stop crying. A real man doesn't cry over duck." "We're going," Daniel protested. "You're spoiling him. Are you ever going to save enough to get married?" I stared at the kid. He was 12 and already trying to manage the household budget. "I make over $700,000 a month. I think we can handle one meal out." Daniel shut up, but spent the whole bus ride glaring at Tommy. I held back a laugh and grabbed his hand, pulling him along. Most people would go to Quanjude for roast duck, but I'd heard from coworkers that Baiyangfang was nearly as good and much cheaper, 50,000 per duck instead of 80. We walked in, and the smell hit us like a wave. I ordered 2 ducks. When the golden, glistening platters arrived, the kids stared in silence. "Well, eat." They attacked the food. Grease ran down every chin, mine included. It was worth every yuan. Afterward, I sent the kids to play and walk through our rooms, planning. Now that I'd decided to stop pretending to be poor, I wanted to fix up the house. Insulation, furniture, proper bedding. I studied the layout and got some ideas, then headed over to Harry's place. He was on his bed sipping wine with a plate of peanuts. I asked if he knew any good craftsmen nearby. He grinned. "Fixing up the house? Getting ready for a wife?" I told him no, just needed repairs and insulation. He thought for a moment and said the best builder in the area was a man called Master Ray. His family used to build mansions for nobility, Harry explained. His skills are the best in the whole city. He charges more, but he's worth it. Money wasn't a concern. I asked where to find him. Harry drained his wine, threw on a coat, and walked me to Cotton Flower Lane. The deeper we went, the quieter and more remote it got. We stopped at a small one-courtyard house. Harry knocked. A woman in a gray padded jacket opened the door and brightened when she saw Harry. "Oh, it's you. Come in. Come in." The yard was full of stacked lumber of every kind. She went to fetch her husband while we sipped the water she'd poured for us. An old man emerged from inside, brushing dust off his gray coat. He looked about 60, with a thin white beard that curled slightly at the tip. He apologized for keeping us waiting. Harry introduced me. "This young man wants to renovate his house." I brought him to the best. Master Ray sighed briefly about how his descendants had lost the family's old properties, and how he was lucky to have even this small place left. Then he caught himself and got down to business. "So, young man, what kind of work do you need done?" I told him I wanted to repair and properly insulate my rooms. I asked what the process would look like and what it would cost. "What kind of renovations did you have in mind?" Master Ray asked. I explained everything: better insulation, new interior walls, proper flooring. He listened quietly, then said it all sounded doable, but he'd need to see the place first. Harry suggested we go right away since it was still early. At our house, I walked Master Ray through every room and laid out my plans. Then I pointed to the side room and asked the big question. Could he turn it into a bathroom with a toilet and a wash area? He studied the space carefully, then shook his head. "Everything else is fine, but a toilet needs drainage pipes, and this part of the city doesn't have that infrastructure yet." He was right. From my previous life's memories, I knew South Gong Lane wouldn't get proper plumbing until decades later during the Reform era. My dream of an indoor bathroom was dead on arrival. I was disappointed, but moved on. How long would the rest take? 10 days to 2 weeks, depending on materials and labor. With extra hands, 10 days should do it. And the cost? He calculated. If you provide materials yourself, 1 million. If I handle everything, materials, labor, all of it, 3 million. I glanced at Harry, who nodded. 3 million was fair. Let's do it. Here's 1 million up front. I handed him the cash. He counted it and promised his reputation was on the line. The work would be first rate. After he left, I thanked Harry properly. "Don't cook tonight. I'm making dinner for you, Peter, and Rain." Harry laughed and waved it off as no big deal, but he didn't refuse. He said he had a bottle of good wine we could share. We had a deal. I went back inside, pulled out my hidden box, took 5 million, and headed to the Chaoyang market. For Harry, I bought 3 pounds of pork belly, a whole chicken, a pound of mushrooms, and peanuts, plus some extra seasonings. On my way home, I slapped my forehead. I'd forgotten to buy new bedding. I detoured to Annie Wong's tailor shop and ordered 4 sets of quilts and blankets, to be picked up and paid for along with the clothes. Back at the courtyard, Peter and Martin were at it again. I could hear them shouting before I even reached the gate. Those two simply couldn't be in the same space without fighting. The kids came home from playing at the Yang family's place next door. The Yangs had 4 children about the same ages as my siblings, and the kids were close friends. Tommy spotted the pork belly on the table immediately. "You bought meat." I tapped his head. "Sharp eyes. Harry helped us today, so I'm cooking him a proper thank you dinner. Now go play while I get to work." Within half an hour, the smell of frying pork filled the entire courtyard. Over in Robert's house, Rose swallowed hard. "Who's cooking meat this early in the evening? Wasn't it the same family this morning?" Robert, still just a mid-level machinist himself, told her to mind her own business. "The kid's a senior machinist now. He can afford a meal of meat." Their son stared at his own plate of mixed flour buns and potato shreds, suddenly losing his appetite. Over in the back court, Martin's father Philip sat at his own dinner table, smelling the pork from my kitchen and feeling bitter. He was proud of his own life. He'd started with nothing, worked his way up to become the private chauffeur for the wealthy Liu family, then cleverly switched to a factory projectionist when the political winds changed. He considered himself a master of reading the times. But when it came to his son, he couldn't help comparing Martin to my siblings. My brothers and sister had top grades. Martin hated studying so much that Philip had to force him just to finish middle school. Philip sometimes wondered if the only difference between our families was that my father had died, as if that had somehow made my siblings tougher. He looked at Martin with open disgust and sighed. Meanwhile, Harry was digging through his cabinets for a bottle of wine he'd been saving for years. Peter watched him and scowled. "You're really going to suck up to that kid just because he made senior machinist?" Harry slapped the back of his head. "I'm doing this for you and Rain, you idiot. He's young and already at the top. You think you'll never need a favor from him someday? He's a metal worker. I'm a cook. What would I ever need from him?" Another slap. "How did I raise such a stupid son?" Peter muttered. "Maybe if you stopped hitting my head, I'd be smarter." Harry kicked him out the door to go fetch Rain, then picked up his wine bottle and followed. They arrived at my place just as Lily came bouncing out. She grabbed Rain's hand, called Harry, Uncle, and Peter, Brother Pete, then dragged Rain inside. "They're here," Lily called. "I heard." I came out of the kitchen, wiped my hands, and welcomed them in. "Sit down. Food's almost ready." A few minutes later, the table was full: chicken stewed with mushrooms, braised pork belly, pork and potato stew, spicy shredded potatoes, and a basket of white flour buns. Harry told me to stop fussing, but I waved him off. I set up a separate table in the other room for the kids, my 3 plus Rain, then sat down with Harry and Peter. "Well, try it." They picked up their chopsticks. After the first bite, both of them froze. Harry stared at me with a complicated expression. "This is beyond anything I expected from you. You've surpassed me." Peter's eyes went wide. "This tastes like Master Lu's cooking at the Typhoon restaurant." That was the head chef, a legendary figure Peter had only tasted once in 2 years of apprenticing there. He'd never forgotten it. And now he was tasting the same level of skill in my kitchen. I shrugged it off. "I'm just a machinist who cooks for his siblings. Nothing special." Harry shook his head slowly. He'd tried to recruit me as his cooking apprentice before, and I'd turned him down. Now, barely a year later, I'd surpassed him entirely, without any formal training, just from making family meals. The regret was written all over his face. If he'd pushed harder back then, he might have had a once-in-a-generation student. Peter asked me how I'd made each dish. I didn't see any reason to keep secrets, so I walked them through my technique step by step. Both father and son listened with shining eyes, their chopsticks forgotten in their hands. After I finished explaining my cooking techniques, Harry let out a long breath. I've been cooking for decades, and I had no idea there were so many layers to it. I understood his reaction. In this era, masters always held back secrets from their apprentices. Whole recipes had been lost over generations because of it. But in my previous life, food food bloggers had revived ancient dishes and shared everything online. I'd picked up plenty from those videos. My approach clashed with traditional methods, and that clash sparked real ideas for Harry. Peter was nodding along too, absorbing every word. Then Harry turned to his son with a deadly serious face. "Everything Jack told us tonight, you never repeat it to anyone. Ever. Or I'll disown you." I tried to wave it off. I wasn't planning to be a chef. What did I care if people knew my tricks? But Harry wouldn't budge. "You don't understand. In our trade, this matters." He smacked Peter's head for good measure until the kid swore he'd keep quiet. Harry opened his treasured bottle. He poured 2 cups, one for me, one for himself, and pointedly ignored Peter's begging eyes. We clinked glasses and drank. The liquor burned down my throat and hit me like a bolt, but then a warmth spread through my whole body. "Good wine," I said. Harry laughed. "Of course it is. I've been saving this for years." Peter whined until Harry grudgingly poured him a cup too. Half an hour later, Peter was face down on the table, dead drunk. Harry cursed under his breath, dragged his son home, then came back for rain. I cleaned up, got the kids washed and into bed, and lay down myself. The wine pulled me under fast. The next morning, I woke expecting a headache but felt perfectly clear. Pure grain liquor, nothing like the chemical-laced stuff from my previous life. I ran through my usual routine: stove, water, boxing, breakfast, kids off to school. 10 days passed. Today was the day Master Ray finished the renovations. Those 10 days had been torture. With our rooms torn apart, I'd moved the kids in with Harry's family and even bought a second-hand bed from a consignment shop. But Harry and Peter snored like thunderstorms. I hadn't slept properly in 10 nights, and my study schedule was ruined. I couldn't wait to move back. Master Ray arrived right on time. We walked into the house together, and my breath caught. It was exactly what I'd imagined, better, even. The old 3 rooms had been transformed into a real home. The main entrance opened into a living room of about 20 square meters, with stairs along one wall leading to a loft. On the other side, the wall connected to the side room. Below the loft was a dining area, a bedroom for me, and a small 10 square meter storage room. Upstairs, 2 bedrooms, one for Daniel and Tommy, one for Lily, each nearly 20 square meters. The side room had also been split into 2 levels, both serving as guest rooms. Bright, spacious, well-insulated. Master Ray had earned every yuan. "Beautiful work," I told him. "You've more than lived up to your reputation." He bowed modestly. I handed him the remaining 2 million. He counted it carefully, nodded, and we shook hands. He'd heard from the courtyard gossips that I was a senior machinist pulling in over 700,000 a month, so he knew the money was good. No awkward haggling, no false modesty, just clean, professional business. "I'll take my leave then," he said with a bow. "Take care, Master Ray." I watched him go, then stood alone in my renovated home, finally feeling like my family had a proper place to live. After Master Ray left, I looked around the empty rooms and realized I still needed furniture. Since I'd already taken the day off, I figured I might as well get everything done at once. New furniture would take too long to build, so I headed to the consignment shop at Dongdan Market. What I didn't know was that the moment I left, every woman in the courtyard pressed her face against my new glass windows, gawking at the renovations. Apparently, they were stunned. One woman held up 3 fingers and announced the cost: 3 million. The others nearly fainted. 3 million. That's 3 years of cornmeal. But then someone reminded them that with my salary, I'd earn it back in 6 months. That led to a round of complaints about their own husbands still being low-level workers. I wouldn't have cared even if I'd known. I was done pretending to be poor. The consignment shop was mostly empty at this hour. An old man dozed behind the counter. A saleswoman greeted me and led me to a huge room in the back, packed wall to wall with second-hand furniture. The first thing that caught my eye was a beautiful official's hat chair. I ran my hand along it. "How much?" 500,000. "It's Wangwali, yellow rosewood. Ming Dynasty style." I let go fast. Then I pointed to a wide double bed. 3 million. Red sandalwood. Supposedly smuggled out of the imperial palace by a eunuch. I turned away. Everything I liked turned out to be made from precious wood with some grand historical story. My taste was apparently too expensive for my wallet, or at least too expensive for what I was willing to spend on furniture. I moved to the ordinary section. The prices there were reasonable. After a long while, I spent about 1.5 million total and got everything I needed. 3 wardrobes, a kitchen cabinet, a round dining table, 4 bookshelves, 5 chairs, 3 beds, and a rosewood vanity table. That last one alone cost $300,000, but I bought it thinking of Lily. I hired 2 porters with a cart to haul it all back to the courtyard. The neighborhood women stared openly as I carried furniture through the gate. I paid the porters $5,000 to help me set everything up inside. When I finally stepped out, the women ambushed me. "Can we see inside?" one asked eagerly. I hesitated, but said yes. They flooded in, and their jaws dropped. Through the windows earlier, they hadn't seen the full picture. Now, standing inside with all the furniture placed, they couldn't believe it. The loft design especially excited the ones with too many children and not enough rooms. "Is it really true it cost $3 million? One woman asked. "Yes," I said. No point hiding it. They'd watched everything happen. "If only we could do the same," another murmured, staring at the upstairs bedrooms. I let them look around for a while, then politely kicked everyone out. I still needed to pick up the new clothes and bedding from Annie Wong's shop. I delayed the pickup because the house was torn apart, but now everything was ready. After the women left, I picked up the bedding and clothes from Annie Wong's shop, then spent the entire afternoon cleaning, wiping down every piece of furniture, scrubbing floors, making beds. I didn't even eat lunch. By the time I finished, the house looked bright and spotless. I folded the new clothes neatly into the wardrobes, laid out the quilts upstairs, and stood back feeling deeply satisfied. To celebrate, I went to the market and bought a pound of pork and a whole chicken. Back in the kitchen, I'd made one smart change during the renovation. Instead of keeping the kitchen in the side room facing the courtyard, where every neighbor could smell what I cooked, I'd moved it inside, against the back wall bordering the empty lot behind us. I'd had Master Ray cut 3 ventilation holes through the wall with bamboo tubes and a sliding wooden board. When I cooked, I'd slide the board up and the smells would blow out the back instead of into the courtyard. I tested it while rendering pork fat. A cold draft came through the holes, and the smell inside faded noticeably. Not perfect, but it helped. Good enough. Half an hour later, I had braised chicken, pork with potato slices, spicy sour cabbage, and white flour buns on the table. I went to the middle court to intercept the kids before they headed to Harry's out of habit. I caught them just in time, walking in hand from the front gate. "We're going home tonight. The house is finished." Tommy took off running. By the time I got there with Daniel and Lily, Tommy was already shouting inside. "It's beautiful. Our new home is so beautiful." Lily looked around with wide eyes, then up at me. "Is this really our house?" "Of course it is. Don't you like it?" she beamed. I gave them the full tour, upstairs, downstairs, every room. When it was done, Daniel still couldn't believe it. "We each have our own bedroom now." "You do. Now let's eat. Tommy, go get Harry's family." Tommy ran off and came back with Harry, Peter, and Rain. I apologized to Harry for not telling him we'd moved back. He waved it away and looked around, genuinely impressed. He'd seen wealthy people's homes before, but he'd never seen a simple 3-room rear wing transformed like this. Even Peter and Rain stared with open envy. Harry predicted the whole neighborhood would be copying this design soon. He was right. For families with too many kids and not enough rooms, a loft conversion was far cheaper than buying a new house. Sure enough, over in the middle court, Derek's mother was already scheming. She told Derek she'd visited my house with the other women and had the answer to their family space problems. Derek panicked at first, thinking she'd picked a fight with me. She smacked his head and said she wasn't crazy. She remembered what happened to the last family that tried to mess with us. No, she just wanted to renovate their own rooms the same way. Derek relaxed. As long as his mother hadn't made trouble with my family, he didn't care. "If you want to renovate, go ahead. I have no objections." That evening, I sent Harry's family home, cleaned up, and sent the kids to do homework. Then I finally lay down in my own room with my books. I'd lost several days of study during the renovation and needed to catch up. The mechanical design book was a third done, maybe 10 more days to finish if I kept my pace focused on understanding, not speed. When I looked up, it was dark outside. I got the kids washed and into bed, then climbed under my new quilt. The softness was incredible. No cold seeping through, no shivering. Now this is living, I thought, and fell asleep without even trying. The next morning, I didn't want to get out of bed. The warm cocoon of new bedding almost defeated me. But I heard voices outside. Work time was coming. I dragged myself up, woke the kids, gave each of them 2,000 for breakfast, and let them buy their own on the way to school. Then I locked up and headed to the factory. At the workshop, the apprentices greeted me warmly as always. Even though I'd only taught them for one day before William warned me to stop, they still respected me for it. They'd eventually learned from older workers why I couldn't continue, and they understood. I sat down at my lathe and got to work. Lately, with the Korean War in full swing, the factory's orders had shifted heavily toward military parts. Most of what landed on my desk now were rifle components. Today I was grinding the rifling inside a gun barrel. Precision work where accuracy determined whether a soldier could hit his target. If I remembered correctly, the standard weapon was still the Soviet Mosin Nagant. In a couple of years, the Soviets would sell us the full production technology, making it our first standard-issue rifle. Looking at the barrel in my hands, I had to admire the leadership's foresight. I'd been working for half an hour when the foreman appeared at my elbow. "The director wants to see you." "Director Lewis? What about?" "No idea. But it should be good news." I shut down my lathe and followed him to the two-story office building in the center of the factory. We climbed the stairs and knocked. "Come in." Inside, Lewis was sitting on a sofa across from a man I'd never seen. A middle-aged officer in military uniform, ramrod straight. Both men turned to look at me, and I could see the surprise on their faces. They'd known I was young, but seeing me in person clearly caught them off guard. Lewis stood and welcomed me warmly. The foreman excused himself and closed the door. "The rifle barrels we've been producing recently. Those are all your work?" Lewis asked. "Yes, sir." My stomach tightened. Had something gone wrong? But the officer stood up grinning. "See, Lewis? I told you it was someone from your factory." He walked over and clapped me hard on the shoulder. "Young man, you don't look like much, but your craftsmanship is first-rate." He gave me a thumbs up. Then he leaned in. "So how about it? Ever thought about coming to work at a military factory?" "Thank you, sir, but I'm not interested in transferring." The officer in uniform had just offered me a position at a military factory. The benefits would be better, sure, but I knew the downsides, especially the lack of freedom. Military factories in this era were tightly controlled, and I still had so much to learn. Going there would limit me. Lewis jumped in immediately, looking panicked. "You can't poach my people. We just trained him." The officer, a man named Zhang, ignored Lewis and smiled at me. "Loyal kid. I like that." Then he turned to Lewis. "Relax, he already said no," but Zhang pushed the point. "A talent like this, you'd better treat him right." Lewis didn't miss a beat. I was already planning to raise his pay after a few more years of development. "But since you've confirmed he's exceptional, starting next month, his salary goes up to 800,000. Zhang nodded approvingly. "Now that's how you treat talent." I stood there feeling awkward. I'd walked in expecting to be scolded for a defective part. Instead, two powerful men were bidding for me right in front of my face. But a raise was a raise. I wasn't going to complain. "If there's nothing else, I'll get back to work," I said. Lewis waved me out. I was happy to leave. What I didn't know was what happened after I closed that door. Zhang hadn't come to the factory just because of me. He had another purpose, to establish a new department at the mill, a security division. Lewis understood immediately what it meant. On the surface, it was about protecting factory equipment and guarding against enemy sabotage. But underneath, it was surveillance. The government was planting eyes inside private factories. The security team would be made up of military veterans, answering to both the police and the armed forces, not to Lewis. He sat there smoking, weighing his options. Refusing could bring consequences he couldn't predict. Accepting meant giving up some of his authority. But he was a practical man. He'd survived warlords and the Japanese occupation by knowing when to bend. "Fine," he said. "When do they start?" 3 days. They shook hands, and Zhang left. Lewis sat alone in his office afterward, staring at the ceiling. He knew the days of running his factory with absolute control were ending. He'd expected it eventually. He just hadn't expected it so soon. Coming out of the director's office, I found the foreman squatting downstairs smoking, his round body looking a bit ridiculous. I coughed behind him. He spun around ready to yell, then saw it was me and switched to curiosity. "Good news? Starting next month, my salary goes up to 800,000. He congratulated me casually. His own pay wasn't much different, so the number didn't impress him. We walked back to the workshop together, joking that his prediction of good news had been spot on. At lunch, William came over looking concerned. He'd heard through Frank that the director had summoned me. I told him quietly about the raise. His eyes went wide. 800,000? That's almost double what I make. He wasn't jealous, just genuinely amazed at the speed. I'd been a senior machinist for barely 2 weeks and already got a raise. But I asked him to keep it secret. I didn't want the courtyard knowing. I'd thought this through carefully. Last time, when I became a senior machinist, people didn't bother me because they figured my 70,000 barely covered 4 mouths plus school fees. But 800,000 changed the math. People who feel poor get resentful of those who don't. If word got out, neighbors would start asking for loans, making demands, creating drama. My plan was to spend heavily this year on things the family needed: furniture, clothes, bedding, renovations, so that by the time prices stabilized in late 52, I could truthfully say the money was spent. If that didn't work, I'd bring my grandparents from the countryside to live with us. Those 2 old foxes could handle any neighbor who came sniffing around far better than I could. I'd rather spend my energy studying than dealing with petty courtyard politics. William promised to keep quiet. We grabbed our lunchboxes and ate. That afternoon, I went back to grinding rifle barrels. I didn't rush, and I didn't cut corners. Every fraction of precision I added meant a soldier on the Korean front might hit his target instead of missing. I couldn't leave my siblings behind to join the army, so this was my way of contributing to the war effort. Near the end of the shift, I finished my quota, stretched my sore wrists, and pulled out my books to squeeze in some reading before the bell. After work, William and I said goodbye at the gate, and I walked home alone. Turning a corner near the courtyard, I stopped short. There was Harry, standing at the mouth of an alley, whispering with a woman in her 30s, attractive, carefully dressed. The White Widow. I'd heard about her in the stories from my previous life. She was the woman who would eventually lure Harry away from his children. In the TV show, some people said Harry left to avoid political classification problems, but that didn't make sense. Harry had told me himself that his family had been servants and cooks going back generations. Nothing that would cause trouble, which meant someone had manipulated Harry into leaving. And from what I remembered of the stories, the most likely suspect was the old lady in the back court, the one who always seemed sweet and harmless, patting children on the head and smiling at everyone. I'd never been able to see anything wrong with her, but I taught my siblings to keep their distance anyway. You never know what's behind a kind face. I pretended I hadn't seen anything and kept walking, but my mind was racing. I'd planned to warn Harry eventually. I just hadn't expected him to meet the White Widow this soon. I couldn't put it off any longer. When I stepped into the courtyard that evening, something felt off. The front court was completely empty. I walked toward the middle court and found everyone crowded together, buzzing with noise. I nudged old Wong, one of the middle court neighbors. "What's going on? They're classifying everyone's family background," he said, blowing out cigarette smoke. In the center of the crowd stood 3 people in military uniforms, a sharp-looking woman in her 30s and 2 younger soldiers, a man and a woman. The leader was explaining the process loudly. "No hiding your family background. Anyone who lies will face consequences." She split the work up, 1 soldier for the front court, 1 for the middle, and she'd handle the back court herself. I followed her to the rear. I wasn't in a rush. I grabbed a stool from my house, sat by the door, and pulled out my mechanical design book while everyone else lined up. I knew what this was about from my previous life's memories. The government had classified rural households in 1950: landlords, rich peasants, middle peasants, poor peasants. Now it was the city's turn. Urban families would be sorted into workers, small craftsmen, merchants, or capitalists. The back court had fewer families, so it went fast. Half an hour later, everyone else was done, and I walked up. The officer, Director Zhang, handed me a sheet explaining the categories. I read it through and waited until she finished with the last family. "So which category does your family fall under?" "I'm a worker at the steel rolling mill." "My family is working class." She looked surprised. "You're awfully young to be working at a factory. I took over my father's position after he passed." My voice went flat. She caught the change and apologized gently. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bring up something painful. Your father wouldn't want to see you sad." I smiled it off. "It's been a while. I'm used to it." She registered my whole family. Me, Daniel, Tommy, and Lily, all under worker class. Then she packed up. Her 2 soldiers came in from the front and middle courts reporting they'd finished too. The 3 of them left together. I went inside, cooked dinner, fed the kids, and sent them to do homework. Then I sat outside with my book again. I heard they did the classification today. Harry appeared beside me. You missed it. You'll have to go register at the military office tomorrow. He sat down and handed me a cigarette. I lit it, took a drag, and decided this was the moment. I saw you today. On my way home. At that alley. He paused for just a beat, then shrugged. So you saw me. So what? Tell me about her, Uncle Harry. Are you serious about that woman? He exhaled slowly. Simple arrangement. I like her looks. She likes my earning power. Then why not just marry her? Bring her home properly. I was genuinely confused. In the stories I remembered, Harry eventually abandoned Peter and Rain to follow the White Widow all the way to Baoding. If he actually liked her, why not just make it official instead of ruining everything? Marry her? Huh. It's not that simple. Harry shook his head and flicked his cigarette ash. You know, my wife died 5 years ago. I've been raising Peter and Rain alone, father and mother both. I want someone who cares about me. But this woman, she won't stay here. She wants me to follow her to Baoding. He sighed. I've got 2 kids. How can I leave for Baoding? So I've been stringing her along, hoping she'll give in and agree to stay. His eyes glinted with self-satisfaction. He thought he was the clever one. I stared at him. This wasn't the story I remembered at all. In the show, Harry was the one who got seduced and dragged away. But here he was, thinking he was playing the White Widow. I had to set him straight. What if she gets tired of waiting and goes to the authorities? Says you forced yourself on her. Harry froze. He literally shivered. He'd never considered that possibility. In this era, that charge meant a bullet. She wouldn't do that. Uncle Harry, if she had to choose between you and her own child back in Baoding, who do you think she'd pick? He couldn't answer. And if she used that threat to control you? What then? He sat there speechless, the confidence drained from his face. I told him to stay calm, keep things quiet, and talk to her honestly. Find out what she really wanted. If necessary, give her some money and send her home peacefully. A clean break. He slapped his knee. Right. I'll go talk to her now. And he rushed off. I shook my head. The man had single women available, and instead, he was chasing a widow from out of town. I called the kids down for their foot washing and put them to bed, then read under my dim 15-watt bulb until sleep took me. The next few days blurred together. The factory's rifle barrels had impressed the military brass so much that substandard orders from other factories were redirected to us. My workload doubled, then tripled. I was grinding barrels until 9 or 10 every night, with no time for books at all. Lewis responded by upgrading the cafeteria, more meat, 2 shifts, to keep the workers fed and productive. I asked Harry to watch my siblings after school. I didn't even have time to ask how things went with the White Widow. Meanwhile, on the day I'd come home to find the courtyard empty, it turned out the army had sent people to classify everyone's family background. A female officer named Director Zhang led the process. When my turn came, she handed me the categories sheet. Urban families fell into 4 classes: workers, small craftsmen, merchants, or capitalists. I work at the steel mill. We're working class, I told her. She looked surprised at my age. I explained I'd inherited my father's position after he died. Her expression softened and she apologized for bringing it up. I told her it was fine and gave her all 4 names. Mine, Daniel's, Tommy's, and Lily's. Worker class, all registered. 3 days after that, the security division arrived. Military trucks rolled up to the factory gate and soldiers jumped out carrying rifles, forming a rigid line. The atmosphere turned cold. Lewis stood at the entrance with other factory leaders, his smile tight. A stern officer named Samuel stepped forward and saluted. Reporting for duty at the steel rolling mill, Lewis switched on his businessman's charm. Welcome. We've been expecting you. Your offices are ready. Shall we get you settled first, or would you prefer to eat? Samuel chose to settle in first. He'd been told by his superiors to cooperate with patriotic capitalists, not antagonize them. So the handshake was firm but polite. 2 men who both understood exactly what the other was thinking, and neither saying it out loud. Lewis put on a warm smile and had his assistant show Samuel and the security team to their new offices inside the factory. As the soldiers marched through the gate in lockstep, the trucks pulled away. Lewis watched them go, his smile slowly fading. One of his managers leaned in and whispered, "Why are they putting a security division in our factory?" Lewis shot him a look. "Some questions you don't ask. Just do your job." Meanwhile, I was deep in my work. 3 straight days of overtime had done something to me. Something I was only beginning to understand. My hands moved almost on autopilot now, grinding barrel after barrel with a speed and precision that would have been impossible a week ago. But the real change was happening inside my head. A kind of virtual workspace had formed in my mind. While my hands worked the physical lathe, my brain was assembling an entire Mosin-Nagant rifle from scratch, every component appearing with exact dimensions, specifications, and materials labeled. The mental blueprint was even better than the original design, with tighter tolerances and improved precision. I'd figured out the pattern over these 3 days. The more I worked past my limits, the more overtime I put in with full concentration, the more knowledge appeared in my mind, as if rewarding my effort. It was like carrying an invisible system that ran on the principle of hard work pays off. No interface, no menu, no notifications. Just a steady flow of deeper understanding. 3 days ago, I'd estimated my machinist skills at roughly level 7 on the scale they'd adopt in 1955. Now I was knocking on the door of level 8. One more breakthrough, and I'd be approaching the legendary tier, the kind of craftsman people joked could build a nuclear bomb by hand. But my mind was reaching its limit. Every barrel demanded absolute focus. 3 days of that intensity had my nerves fraying. I needed a break. When the lunch bell rang, I finished one last barrel, shut down the lathe, and grabbed my lunchbox. William and I headed to the cafeteria together. "You've been killing yourself," he said. "Time to ease up. That's the plan." The cafeteria was packed. Every window had a long line of workers with yellowish, thin faces, the look of chronic poor nutrition that was normal for this era. During the overtime push, Lewis had at least added daily meat dishes to the menu, which was rare. Usually meat showed up maybe 3 times a month. The extra protein was why workers didn't mind the long hours. A coworker from Workshop 2 spotted me and tried to wave me to the front of the line. Others joined in, insisting I cut ahead. I shook my head and told them William and I would wait our turn like everyone else. We lined up at the back. Workers from other lines noticed the commotion and started whispering. "Who's that?" someone asked. "That's Master Jack, youngest senior machinist in the whole factory. The guy next to him is his master." Someone else chimed in about how I'd once spent a whole morning teaching apprentices before stopping for reasons nobody fully understood, and how those workers still remembered the kindness. I stood there feeling awkward, hearing all this praise float around me. William smiled quietly. "They really respect you, you know. The other senior machinists here are hired guns. They show up when Lewis needs them and disappear the rest of the time. You're different. You came up through the ranks. You help people. That matters. It's all because you taught me well, Master," I said. He laughed and shook his head, but I could tell he was proud. William's compliment left him speechless, so he just slapped my shoulder. "You always know what to say, kid." The cafeteria line moved fast. When we reached the window, the lady behind the counter lit up when she saw me. She gave William a generous portion, then turned to me with extra warmth. I ordered the same thing as William, 2 mixed flour buns, 1 meat dish, 1 soup, and paid like everyone else. At our table, William eyed both our overflowing boxes and laughed. "Even the cafeteria ladies favor you. Your master here is just riding your coattails." I had no idea how to respond to that. Nearly 3 years in this era, and I still couldn't match the easy banter of the locals. My life had been so small. As a child, the city was too dangerous to explore. Then the Japanese came, forced my father into the factory, and kept us half-starved. After they left, my father's health collapsed from years of hard labor. He died the year before liberation. That shock triggered my past life memories. A year later, I took his position at the mill. William watched me fumble for words and burst out laughing. "Your skills are top-notch, but that tongue of yours still needs training." Then his expression turned serious. "There's something else. Your education level needs work. I know you can't attend regular school because of your siblings, but the government is running night schools now and literacy classes. You could attend evening sessions. The way things are going, they'll demand more education from workers in the future. If you earn a diploma from night school, your path opens up. You might even become an engineer someday." Night school. I was stunned. I'd assumed those programs wouldn't start until 1953. Apparently, I was wrong. "I'll go," I told him. He was right, and I knew it. My actual knowledge was far beyond night school level. I could probably teach the classes. But nobody knew that. And if I wanted to contribute something meaningful to this country's future, I needed official credentials. After lunch, I went back to grinding barrels, but my mind kept turning over William's words. His foresight surprised me. Anyone who'd survived the old society and come out sharp on the other side was never simple. When the shift ended, I said goodbye to William and headed straight to the address he'd given me. I found the building and looked up at the sign. Chinese People's University. I stood there with my mouth open. This wasn't just any night school. This was the predecessor of one of the most important universities in the country, the institution that would become the cradle of China's future leadership. I'd heard friends joke in my previous life that the first night school was built specifically to educate government cadres. I'd thought they were exaggerating. Turns out they weren't. A young soldier guarding the entrance walked over. "What are you doing standing there?" "Is this the night school? Are workers allowed to study here?" He looked me up and down. "You're here to learn?" I nodded, still feeling dazed. "What's going on here?" Another voice called out. A voice interrupted us at the gate. I turned and saw a man in his 40s wearing a gray mouse suit with a teacher badge on his chest. He had the sharp eyes of a scholar. The guard saluted him. "Director Yun, this man is asking about enrollment." Director Yun looked me over. "You're a worker?" "Yes, sir. I'm at the loose steel rolling mill. My master told me workers could study here." He nodded. "Good. The working class is the backbone of this nation. But our courses may be challenging." "What's your education level?" "I've never been to school," I admitted. Saying it out loud in front of this man made me feel smaller than it should have. "But I've learned a lot from my master." His eyebrow twitched. "No schooling at all. What's your position at the factory? Apprentice? Junior worker?" "I'm a senior machinist." He stared. "I've met plenty of senior machinists, but never one your age." I could tell he didn't fully believe me, but he seemed to like that I wanted to learn. He waved me through the gate. As we walked inside, he told me I was lucky with my timing. Just 3 days ago, orders had come down allowing working professionals to attend night school. Anyone who passed the yearly exams would receive a matching diploma. The program hadn't even been publicly announced yet. "Where'd you hear about this?" he asked. I just laughed awkwardly. I had no idea William's information was that fresh. He brought me to an office where another teacher sat writing, a stern-looking man in the same style of suit. Director Yin introduced me. "I brought you a student, Charlie. Guess what level he is?" Teacher Charlie glanced at me. 16, 17 years old? Junior worker at best. He says he's a senior machinist. Neither of them believed it, and they weren't shy about showing it. Senior machinists were rare treasures in any factory. A teenager holding that rank was unheard of. Charlie moved on to business. "Night school works like this. No time limits on studying, but there's one exam per year. Pass and you get the diploma for that level. Fail and you get nothing." I nodded. "Now tuition. Elementary to middle school level costs $500,000. Middle school to high school is $700,000. That's $1,200,000 total. Can you handle that?" "Yes," I said without hesitating. Then I added, "But I'm not sure where my knowledge level actually stands." "I'd like to find out." Charlie raised an eyebrow. Director Yun cut in, sounding annoyed. "Kid, you just told us you've never been to school. Now you're acting like you might test out of something? Are you bluffing?" I felt a flash of frustration. "I'm not bluffing. Test me. That's the fastest way to find out." I wasn't about to spend years in night school when I already had the knowledge. I needed the diploma, not the education. If I didn't show some of my real ability now, I'd be stuck here far longer than necessary. Director Yun's eyes narrowed. "Fine. You want to prove yourself? Let's see it." He turned to Charlie. "Got any elementary school exams? Let's start there and see what this kid is really made of." "Are you sure about this?" Teacher Charlie asked. "I'm sure." He opened a drawer and pulled out 2 exam papers. Last year's upper elementary finals from a local school. "You have 30 minutes. I didn't answer. I just grabbed a chair, sat down, picked up a pencil, and started writing. Honestly, for someone with a university education from a previous life, elementary school problems were nothing. The knowledge in this era differed from what I remembered in some areas, but as long as politics and Russian weren't involved, I could handle it. Between my own knowledge and years of helping my siblings with homework, this was easy. Behind me, Director Yun and Charlie stood watching over my shoulder. I could feel them exchanging glances. After a few minutes, both started nodding. I finished both papers in under 20 minutes. Before I could even hand them over, Charlie snatched them up. He scanned through the answers, then looked at me with suspicion. "You said you never went to school. So why is your accuracy above 90%? "I really haven't been to school," I said. "But my master taught me a lot, and I've been studying on my own to help my younger siblings with their homework." Both men stared at me with hard, searching eyes. I could tell what they were thinking. In this city, enemy agents were still hiding everywhere. A kid who claimed no education but aced exams could look suspicious. If you don't believe me, investigate. Check with the factory. Check with my neighbors. They exchanged a look and seemed to reach some silent agreement. Charlie relaxed slightly. Fine. Your test shows you're at elementary graduation level. Want to try the middle school exam too? Not tonight. I need to get home and cook for my family. It had already been nearly an hour since my shift ended. My siblings would be hungry. Director Yin nodded reluctantly. Come back tomorrow. We'll test your middle school level then, so we know which class to put you in. I thanked them both and left. On my way out, I could tell they were already planning to look into my background. If everything checked out, that I really was a 17-year-old senior machinist with no formal education. They'd realize they might have stumbled onto something unusual. I rushed home through the courtyard, barely acknowledging the neighbors who called out to me. When I pushed open my door, the table was already set. White flour buns, pork with potatoes, spicy cabbage. Harry must have cooked for the kids. But nobody had touched the food. All three of them were just sitting there, staring at the dishes. Why aren't you eating? Tommy looked miserable. Daniel wouldn't let us start without you. Daniel straightened up, dead serious. You're the head of this family. We don't eat until you're home. Even Lily nodded firmly, her little face set with determination. Tommy rubbed his growling stomach. But I'm so hungry. I felt a lump in my throat. I know you're trying to be good, but you're still growing. You can't skip meals. From now on, if I'm late, eat without me. That's an order. Daniel clearly disagreed, but said nothing. I handed out buns and scooped food onto their plates. They finally dug in. Tommy looked up mid-bite. Harry's cooking isn't as good as yours. I smacked his head lightly with my chopsticks. Eat your food and stop talking. I sat there feeling grateful for Harry. He'd cooked for my siblings without being asked, and the food was waiting on the table when I got home. Whatever happened, I owed him. I made a mental note. If things worked out, I'd find ways to look after Peter and Rain down the road. After dinner, Daniel surprised me by volunteering to wash the dishes. I almost stopped him, then thought better of it. He was 12. Time he started helping. I sent Tommy and Lily to do homework and sat down with my book. March was fading into April. The courtyard's locust tree had sprouted new buds. But my mind kept drifting to Harry's situation, so I gave up reading and walked to the middle court. Harry was alone, smoking. I thanked him again for feeding the kids. Don't mention it, he said, handing me a cigarette. It was a Dakiaman, expensive brand, $3,500 a pack. When did you start smoking the fancy stuff? He laughed. A client gave them to me after I catered a banquet yesterday. I raised an eyebrow. Uncle Harry, don't play poor with me. I know what you charge for private banquets, $50,000 a table. You make more from side jobs than your factory salary. He chuckled, caught. Force of habit. Then I asked the real question. What happened with the White Widow? He took a long drag. It's done. I gave her money. She's going back to Baoding. I'm staying with Peter and Rain. I exhaled with relief. No loose ends. None. And you saved me, kid. After I went to talk to her that day, she told me something. The same day you warned me, someone had approached her with a plan, a way to force me to leave the city with her. If you hadn't tipped me off, I'd have walked right into it. Did she say who? Harry shook his head. She didn't know them. From her description, I couldn't figure it out either. That confirmed my suspicion. Whoever was behind it had used a middleman, smart enough not to show their own face. I had my guesses about who it might be, but without proof, I kept quiet. We talked a while longer, then I went home satisfied. With the White Widow gone, Peter and Rain's future was safer. Whether the rest of the courtyard's drama would still unfold the way I remembered from the TV show, that was anyone's guess. But it wasn't my concern anymore. I'd helped Harry because he'd helped my family. Debt paid. The next evening after work, I went straight to the night school for my middle school test. The guard recognized me and waved me through. I knocked on Charlie's office door. Come in. Inside, 3 men were eating and drinking around a desk. Charlie, Director Yun, and an older man I didn't recognize. The table held pork head meat, chili fried pork, and 2 bottles of Shifeng liquor. When I looked more closely at the old man, something clicked. If I wasn't mistaken, this was someone important, a man surnamed Yin who would become a major figure in the years ahead. So this is the young senior machinist you mentioned? The old man asked, chewing casually. That's him, Principal, Director Yin confirmed. Unbelievable, isn't it? We checked his background last night. He's the real deal. The principal nodded slowly. Genuinely talented. Then, Charlie offered me food and drink. I turned it down. I'd rather just take the test. He looked pleased that I hadn't tried to cozy up to them. He pulled out exam papers from a drawer, middle school finals from the prestigious Beta-affiliated school. These aren't easy, he said with a meaningful look. Do well, and there might be a reward. Then the three of them went right back to eating and drinking while I sat at a side table, stomach growling, the smell of pork and liquor torturing me. I picked up the pencil and started writing as fast as I could. The sooner I finished, the sooner I could go home and eat. This had to be the worst testing environment imaginable. Starving, surrounded by food I couldn't touch, and three teachers who seemed more interested in their wine than my exam. I fought through the hunger while the smell of pork and liquor drifted from their table. The middle school questions were harder than elementary, but still manageable, roughly equivalent to primary school level from my previous life. Chinese, math, natural science, all fine. Social science covered geography, politics, and history, which I could handle from memory. Politics I could write with the right ideological language. Then I hit Russian. I stared at the page. In my previous life, I'd studied English. I knew zero Russian. Not a single word. I felt a wave of regret. I should have picked some up, given that Russian was practically the country's second language right now. But there was nothing I could do. I refused to guess blindly, so I left the entire Russian section blank. I stood to hand in my papers. That's when I realized all three men were standing right behind me. Charlie took the papers. The principal, the old man, pulled out the Russian exam before anyone else could look. Why is this completely empty? Not one word. I've never studied any foreign language, sir. I didn't want to fake it, he smirked. So much for the genius your teachers were bragging about. My face burned. If the floor hadn't been solid concrete, I'd have tried to dig a hole with my toes. Charlie rescued me. Let's grade the rest first. He and Director Yin split the papers and started marking right there. While they worked, the principal sat down across from me and studied my face. I later learned what had happened the night before. Charlie and Director Yun had gone to him after I left, asking him to use his connections to investigate my background. He'd made a few calls. When the report came back, all three of them were shocked. A worker who'd jumped from apprentice to senior machinist in 18 months and was now teaching himself mechanical design and electrical engineering on the side. They'd never seen anything like it. Do you play chess? The principal asked suddenly. Not very well. He pulled a set of Chinese chess from a drawer and laid out the pieces. I sat across from him and we played. At first I kept up, but he was far better. I slowed down, staring at the board, stuck. He didn't rush me. He lit a cigarette and watched me think. Then, out of nowhere, would you like to go to university? The question hit me like a truck. Universities had stopped regular admissions since liberation. The National College entrance exam wouldn't restart until October 1952, more than a year away. And even then, they'd only take high school graduates. I had no diploma of any kind. If anyone else had asked, I would have brushed it off. But this man was someone I recognized from my previous life's knowledge, a figure who would become very powerful. I answered honestly, yes, I want to go. But universities aren't enrolling, and I'm not a high school graduate. Is it even possible? I knew the gap between a factory worker and a college graduate wasn't just about salary. It was about legitimacy. If I stayed a worker and somehow produced advanced knowledge, people would get suspicious. But if I had a university degree, the same achievements would just make me a genius. That invisible line between the two worlds, I understood it better than most. The principal smiled mysteriously. If you want it, it can happen. He didn't explain further. The principal called Charlie and Director Yun back to check my results. Charlie handed over the graded papers. The old man flipped through them and smiled. Not bad at all. I was confused. I'd left the entire Russian section blank. How is that not bad? He laughed. These are exams from Beta-affiliated middle school. Even students who pass into technical colleges can't score this high. And you've never set foot in a classroom. Apart from the Russian, you really are something. I exhaled with relief. Of course I'd done well. I was a college graduate in my previous life. Acing a middle school test was expected. But Russian was a genuine blind spot. I'd studied English before, never a word of Russian. Then the principal waved Charlie and Director Yin out of the room. I need to speak with him alone. They exchanged knowing glances and left, shutting the door behind them. The old man looked at me steadily. You're young, talented, and hungry to learn. Would you be interested in studying Russian with me? I froze. This wasn't just an offer to learn a language. This was a connection to someone who would become extremely powerful. Having him as a teacher could reshape my entire future. I'd be honored, I said immediately, then hesitated. But my factory job, he waved it off. Just come after work each day. Relief flooded through me. I stood and bowed deeply. Thank you, teacher. He handed me a notebook, his personal notes on learning Russian, compiled over years. Methods, techniques, shortcuts, all written out clearly. Study this at home. Come to me with questions. I asked about night school. You passed. I'm putting you in the high school class. I thanked him again and practically ran home. It was already dark. I worried the kids hadn't eaten, but when I checked the kitchen, a few buns and some stir-fried vegetables remained. They'd fed themselves. I sat down with the notebook and the leftover food, but the notebook consumed me so completely that I forgot to eat. The Russian learning methods inside were brilliant, systematic, detailed, surprisingly difficult. 2 hours vanished before Daniel's voice pulled me back to reality. After washing up, I sat thinking about how much work lay ahead. Russian was going to be as hard as English had been in my previous life, maybe harder. But with a teacher like this, I had a real chance. A knock at the door interrupted me. Harry and Peter stood outside. Just checking on you, Harry said. Peter blurted out that his dad had been worried, earning himself a smack on the head. I invited them in and explained that I'd enrolled in night school to improve my education. I'd need to go every evening after work, which meant I couldn't always cook for the kids. Would you mind keeping an eye on their dinners when I'm late? Harry nodded without hesitation. I told him everything openly. There was no point hiding it when I needed his help. His concern for me and my siblings was genuine, and I felt that warmth again. Whatever debt I'd built up with this man, I intended to repay it many times over. So that's why you've been rushing off after work. Night school. Harry relaxed once he understood. Then he offered, why not just have your siblings eat dinner at my place every night? Save me the trip to your kitchen. I shook my head immediately. Harry's family wasn't short on food, but I couldn't impose like that. Having him cook at my place was already more than enough. Peter spoke up. If Dad doesn't want to do it, I'll cook for them. Harry smacked the back of his head. Nobody asked you, idiot. Why do you keep hitting me? You'll actually make me stupid one day. I'll hit you whenever I want. What are you going to do about it? Harry grabbed Peter by the collar and shoved him out the door. Go home and sleep. I can't stand looking at you. Peter stormed off, ignoring me when I called after him. I turned to Harry. Was that really necessary? Harry sighed, lit a cigarette, and took a long drag. What did I do in my past life to deserve that boy? He can't tell a kind word from an insult. I told him Peter was still young, that he'd mature. Harry shook his head. He'll be old enough to marry in a few years. And there's no woman in the house to teach him the things I can't. I sensed an opening. Are you really planning to stay single forever? He went quiet. Despite the close call with the White Widow, I could hear it in his voice. He was lonely. Late at night, alone, the desire for companionship was eating at him. That worried me. One widow was handled, but there could always be another. Why not ask a matchmaker? I suggested. Easy for you to say. I've got 2 kids. What decent woman wants to walk into that? And my biggest fear is finding someone who treats Peter and Rain badly. Being stuck between a new wife and your children. That's the worst spot a man can be in. I nodded. He had a point. Stepmothers were a gamble in any era, and his salary, while decent, looked a lot less attractive when split across 4 people. What about a woman from the countryside? Harry stared at me like I was an idiot. The countryside is booming right now. Land reform just happened. Every farmer is getting their own fields for the first time in history. An extra person in the family means an extra acre. Why would any farmer let his daughter marry a city man and lose that? Country girls are harder to find than city ones right now. I felt foolish. He was right. The rural land distribution had changed everything. Families were holding on to every member they had. I had nothing else to offer. I guess the matchmaker is still your best bet. Harry stubbed out his cigarette and stood. I'll figure it out myself. Get some rest. At the door he paused. Same arrangement tomorrow? I'll cook for the kids, if it's not too much trouble. I'll need your help for a few more days. He waved it off and disappeared toward the middle court. I watched him go, feeling a deeper appreciation for the man. Then I locked up and checked on the kids upstairs, all asleep. I lay in bed, and my thoughts drifted to the countryside, to land reform, to family. My grandparents were out there. So were my second uncle, his wife, and their 5 children. With the land distribution, I hoped they'd gotten a good share. I calculated the time. It had been nearly half a year since I'd visited. The faces of my grandfather and grandmother floated up in my mind, wrinkled and kind. They'd always treated me the best of anyone. I missed them. Maybe it was time to go see them. With that thought warming me, I drifted off to sleep. Wake up, big brother. I opened my eyes confused. Daniel was calling me. Usually, I was the one waking everyone else. His voice came again. Breakfast is ready. I threw on my clothes and walked out. There was Daniel, carrying dishes from the kitchen. Tommy and Lily sat at the table, still half asleep. I looked outside, barely dawn. Why didn't you wake me? Why are you cooking? Daniel set the food down and looked at me seriously. I heard you talking with Uncle Harry last night. You're busy with work and night school. I'm old enough to help. From now on, let me handle the cooking. My heart swelled. I ruffled his hair before he could protest, then sat down. The mixed flour buns were lumpy and uneven. The corn porridge had a burnt smell. The only side dish was pickled vegetables. I picked up a bun and bit in. It was sour, too little baking soda. But somehow, it was the best thing I'd ever tasted. Not bad, I told him. Just needs a little more alkali next time. His face lit up. Then he tried his own bun, and his expression crumbled. He looked at Tommy and Lily, who were poking at theirs nervously, then back at me, wolfing mine down. His eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry. I wasted the flour. I walked over and rubbed his head again. You didn't waste anything. This is better than what I make. I glared at the younger two. Eat. Tommy took a bite and yelped. So sour. One look from me, and he swallowed. Lily wrinkled her nose, but ate quietly, washing it down with porridge without complaint. Daniel watched all of us eating and wiped his eyes. A small smile appeared. We finished every bite. After the kids left for school, I knocked on Harry's door, grinning so wide my face hurt. Let me guess, your little brother cooked today? Harry said before I even spoke. How did you know? Because you look like a fool who just won the lottery. Your smile is practically touching your ears. I asked him to supervise Daniel's cooking that evening instead of doing it himself. Let the boy learn by doing. Harry agreed and shooed me off to work. On the walk to the factory, coworkers kept asking why I was so happy. I told them my 12-year-old brother made breakfast. One man sighed enviously. My son is 15 and won't even pick up a fallen bottle of soy sauce. Near the factory gate, a crowd had gathered. Workers were clustered outside, watching something. What's going on? New department, someone explained. Called the security division. They're doing a head count. All former soldiers, apparently, real tough guys. I thought back to the uniformed officer I'd seen in Lewis's office. So the security team had officially moved in. Looking at the armed men at the gate, I understood what this meant. The government was already laying groundwork. In my previous life's memories, the big push for public-private partnerships in industry would come around 1953 to 1955. But the infiltration was starting now, quiet, methodical. I watched the factory I'd grown up in and felt conflicted. From the nation's perspective, consolidating private industry made sense. Concentrate resources, accelerate development. But from the perspective of patriotic businessmen like Lewis, it meant losing everything they'd built. Then again, for workers like me, public ownership meant better treatment, better benefits, job security. The Iron Rice Bowl wasn't just an expression. I stopped overthinking. This was above my pay grade. I filed through the gate with everyone else, nodded at the security guards, and headed to my lathe, still smiling about those terrible, wonderful, sour buns. At the factory gate, soldiers with rifles were checking workers against a list, calling names one by one. In the middle of them stood a stern-faced officer whose gaze seemed to cut right through people. Frank went through ahead of me without trouble. Then my name was called. Jack Joe, here. I stepped forward, but before the soldier could wave me through, the officer spoke up. Wait. Every worker's head turned. The officer smiled and explained he'd heard about the factory's youngest senior machinist and simply wanted to chat. People relaxed. Some even looked proud that a military man knew about me. I didn't buy his explanation for a second, but I had nothing to hide. We went into the guardhouse, a tiny room with a bed, 2 chairs, and a table. He introduced himself as Samuel Song, the new head of the security division. He offered me a Dakiaman cigarette and got straight to pleasantries about wanting to befriend me. I accepted the smoke and played humble. You're too kind, Captain Song. I'm just a worker. It's my honor that someone of your rank would want to talk. I kept my tone warm, but said absolutely nothing that could be taken as picking a side. I'd already figured out what he wanted. The security division had just arrived. Their presence would unsettle the workers. They needed someone respected on the factory floor to help keep things calm, and to build a network that would counter Lewis's existing power structure, paving the way for the eventual public-private takeover. Samuel noticed I wasn't biting. I could almost hear him thinking, "Little fox," behind that composed smile. He dropped the pretense. "I'll be direct. Our arrival may cause some unrest among the workers. I'd like you to step in when needed and help keep things stable." I shook my head. "I appreciate the trust, Captain, but I can't. I'm too young. Despite my rank, I don't have real influence with the workers. I've only been a senior machinist for a short time, and I have no apprentices. My voice doesn't carry the way you need it to." I let him absorb that, then added, "But if you need someone who can actually do what you're asking, my master William Liu would be perfect. He has deep respect among the workers and real authority on the shop floor." This wasn't just deflection. I genuinely believe this could change William's life for the better. His machinist talent had a ceiling. He'd probably never go higher than where he was now. But if he connected with the government's people, he could transition into factory management after the public-private merger. He could become a cadre instead of just a craftsman. It was a better path for him. Samuel thought it over, studying my face. Then he nodded slowly. "We'll consider it." "Thank you, Master Jack." He hadn't gotten what he came for, but he'd learned something important, that I wasn't going to oppose them either. For now, that was enough. I stood, thanked him, and headed to my workshop. Walking into workshop 2, I could hear the workers buzzing before I even crossed the threshold. Everyone was talking about the security division. "Think the factory's going to become state-owned? Has to be. Only government factories have security departments. If it does, the benefits would be amazing." William spotted me and hurried over, worried. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Master." The other workers crowded around, impressed that a military officer had singled me out for a conversation. Some looked admiring, others envious. I was used to it by now, since no tasks had been assigned. All the managers had been at the gate dealing with the security team's arrival. The workshop was at a standstill. I lit a cigarette with William near the door, away from the machines. "Master, have you ever thought about switching to a leadership position?" He laughed and smacked my head. "You think this is your factory? You can't just decide to become a boss." He figured I was joking. I'd wanted to tell him about Samuel's request, that the security team needed someone with real influence among the workers, and I'd recommended him. But I stopped myself. This might be part of a larger government plan. If William accidentally let it slip, it could backfire badly. Better to let Samuel approach him directly. The idea wasn't even confirmed yet. "Just thinking out loud," I said, playing dumb. At lunch, William asked about night school. I told him everything. The exams, scoring over 90% on the elementary and middle school tests, being placed in the high school class. When I mentioned that an older man surnamed Yin had taken me on as a personal student to learn Russian, William's eyes widened with shock. Then I brought up something that had been nagging me. "Master, when I showed up at the night school, Director Yin said the order allowing workers to enroll had only come down 3 days earlier. They hadn't even announced it publicly yet. But you told me about it before that." "How did you know?" William went quiet. Then he said flatly, "Just know that it happened. You don't need to know how I found out." He picked up his pace and walked ahead of me toward the cafeteria. I tried to follow up, but he clearly didn't want to talk. He grabbed his food without waiting for me and headed straight back to the workshop. I felt a pang of regret for pushing, but I was genuinely curious. William's family was simple: a son named Victor, 20, working at the post office, and a 16-year-old daughter named Susan in high school. No government connections that I knew of. Yet someone with access to classified policy decisions had tipped him off. That person had to be high-ranking and close to William. I had my guesses, but I let it go. Whatever secrets William carried, he was still my master. He'd always looked out for me. If he wanted to tell me someday, I'd listen. If not, I'd pretend I never asked. After lunch, I washed my box and went looking for him. He was in our usual smoking spot behind the workshop, crouching alone with a cigarette, coughing. I squatted beside him. "I'm sorry, Master. If you don't want me to ask, I won't. Please don't be upset." He exhaled a long stream of smoke. "It's not that I don't want to tell you. It's that I can't. Someone told me, but this kind of thing is sensitive. It crosses lines. I only passed it to you because I care about your future. Don't ask who it was. Understood, Master. William sighed, his eyes distant. We finally found peace. We need to appreciate it. Some things, the less you know, the safer you are. I nodded deeply. He was right. We could sit here in safety only because hundreds of thousands of soldiers were fighting on the Korean front. There's a saying I remembered from my previous life. There's no such thing as a peaceful era. Only people carrying the burden so others don't have to. You've got a real opportunity now, he said, stubbing out his cigarette. Make the most of it. He patted my shoulder and headed back inside. That afternoon, the foreman finally rushed in to hand out assignments. No small talk, no jokes, just tasks and gone. The security team's arrival had rattled the entire leadership. I finished my quota in 2 hours and spent the rest of the day reading. The deeper I got into mechanical design, the more I realized how much I didn't know. Some of the parts described in the book were beyond even my current machining ability. It humbled me. The confidence I'd been building deflated, and I was grateful for it. When you feel small, that's when you need knowledge most. After work, I headed straight to the night school. At the gate, Teacher Charlie called out to me, pushing a bicycle loaded with grocery bags. He grinned. You lucky kid. You actually became the principal's student. I half expected you to fail, you knew? Of course I knew. Remember I told you there'd be a reward if you did well? I laughed, scratching my head. I hadn't realized the reward meant becoming Principal Yan's personal student. Charlie told me the principal rarely took disciples. The whole faculty had been surprised he agreed. I found the principal's office on the 2nd floor. He was writing when I walked in and didn't look up for a while. When he finally noticed me, he smiled and tossed me a red booklet. Here, your official middle school diploma. I pulled some strings. High school is on you. But if you impress me this year, there'll be another surprise. He'd already assigned me to class 302 on the 3rd floor, a high school level class of working professionals. For Russian, I'd continue self-studying from his notebook and come to him with questions. I bowed, genuinely moved. Thank you, teacher. He waved me off. Go to class. The classroom was a worn room with about 50 seats. Only a dozen or so workers were there. I picked a spot and sat down. Hey, I'm Dennis. Ceramics factory. A lean guy in his early 20s behind me extended his hand. Jack. Loose steel rolling mill. Jack. Why does that sound familiar? From another seat, a man in his 30s wearing gray cloth spoke up. Jack Joe. Isn't that the youngest senior machinist at the Lou Mill? Dennis slapped his forehead. That's it. You're the famous one. The older man introduced himself. I'm Luke. I work for the railway. Dennis and I both perked up. The railway was one of the best jobs in the country. In this era, train tickets were nearly impossible to get without connections. And railway positions could be passed down through generations. The ultimate iron rice bowl. For a moment, even my senior machinist status didn't feel as impressive. Luke caught our admiration and smiled proudly. If you ever need tickets, come find me. Absolutely, Dennis and I said in unison. We were still chatting when footsteps echoed from the hallway. All three of us straightened up in our seats as the teacher approached. Class started. A refined-looking man in his 40s walked in carrying a folder, wrote his name on the board, Teacher Zhu, and began lecturing straight from the textbook. The content was basic, roughly middle school level from my previous life. He read the material word for word without much explanation. I realized quickly that apart from Russian, I wouldn't learn much here. I decided to get a set of high school textbooks and study at home instead. When the bell rang, I was out of my seat instantly. Dennis called after me, wanting to walk home together. I gave him my address, 95 South Gong Lane, but told him I had something to do first. He shrugged and ran off to catch Luke from the railway instead. I went to the principal's office. Principal Yin was still writing at his desk. Teacher, could I get a set of high school textbooks to study at home? I have siblings to take care of, and coming here every night is difficult. His eyes flickered with displeasure, but when I explained about my family, he relented. Fine, but I'll test you once a month. If your results satisfy me, you can stay home. If not, you come back to class. Deal? Deal. He reminded me I hadn't paid tuition. I pulled out $700,000 and handed it over. He told me to come back tomorrow for the books, then shooed me out. I rushed home through the darkening streets. April nights came faster than winter ones. As I passed an alley near the courtyard, I heard muffled voices from inside a small compound. I was about to keep walking when 2 words stopped me cold: organization and black cat. Enemy agents. My blood went cold. I knew there were still spies operating in the city in 1951, but I never expected to stumble onto them this close to home. My first instinct was to find the police, but I hesitated. What if I was wrong? I looked at the courtyard wall, jumped, and pulled myself over. The yard was empty. I crept toward the main house and pressed my ear against the wall. A raspy voice was giving orders. Black Cat, this is your assignment. You must complete it. Another voice, tight with anger. Impossible. They just set up a security division at the factory. Soldiers everywhere. This is suicide. There's someone inside who'll help. You just need to smuggle the explosives in. No. I've lost too many people following these orders. 32 of us started. Only 10 are left. I'm done. The raspy voice turned cold. Your families are on the other side. If you refuse, think about what happens to them. Silence. Then, defeated, how many more missions before I can go home? 3. Then you'll be replaced. Fine. The door opened. A tall figure stepped out wearing a black cloth over his face, eyes full of resignation. Before he took a second step, I struck him from behind with a knife-hand chop to the neck. He collapsed. I caught his body, dragged him to a corner, and propped him against the wall. Then I walked to the front door and knocked, imitating the tall man's voice. Who is it? It's me. Why are you back? I want proof. Write me a guarantee that I can really go home after 3 missions. The man inside hesitated, then agreed. I heard him rummaging for paper. After a moment, done. Here, the door flew open, and a pistol appeared, firing 5 shots into the empty doorway. But I wasn't standing there. I'd flattened myself against the wall beneath the window. As the hunched shooter stepped out, confused that nobody had fallen, I lunged from below and chopped his gun hand. He screamed. The pistol clattered to the ground. I drove a fist toward his chest. He was skilled. He deflected my punch with his left palm, leaned back, and kicked at my chest. I sidestepped, turned my fist into a blade hand, and slashed at his leg. He spun away, retracted his leg, then whipped a roundhouse kick at my head. I jumped back 3 steps to dodge his kick, then closed in again. This was my first real fight against a skilled opponent since learning my family's shingi boxing. It felt exhilarating. Every strike aimed at vital points, neither of us holding back. But no matter how fast he attacked, I stayed in control. When he realized he couldn't beat me, he tried to run. I wasn't about to let that happen. I surged forward, raining punches like a storm, and drove my fist into his chest. He flew backward, crashed to the ground, and coughed up blood. He tried to stand but couldn't. Impressive, kid, he spat, wiping his mouth with his good hand. Beaten by a boy. You chose to be a spy. You knew this day would come. Before I could knock him out, I heard boots pounding down the alley. Move. They're in this courtyard. Don't let them escape. Too late to leave. I stood still and waited. The gate exploded inward. Soldiers with rifles swarmed in, surrounding all 3 of us, me and the 2 spies. Don't move. Hands up. I raised my hands immediately. I'm a worker from the steel mill. Those 2 are the spies, not me. A soldier raised his rifle to hit me, but a sharp voice cut through. Stop. Who told you to do that? A commanding officer pushed through the crowd and glared at the soldier. You think everyone here is a spy? Tell me, what makes this kid look like one? The soldier stammered. The officer kicked him in the backside. Get out of my sight. He ordered the others to lower their weapons, secure the 2 real agents, and search every inch of the compound. Then he turned to me with a grin. You must be Jack Zhou, the youngest senior machinist at the Lu Steel Mill. You know me? He laughed. My buddy Zhang won't shut up about you. Says your machining skills are wasted at a civilian factory. Keeps trying to get you transferred to a military plant. He even dragged me to the mill to watch you work from a distance. I've never seen a man obsess over another man like that. He didn't even try this hard with his wife. I had absolutely no idea how to respond to that. He moved on. So tell me, how did you find these spies? I explained everything. Walking home from night school, overhearing the words, organization, and Black Cat, climbing the wall, listening to their conversation about smuggling explosives into a factory, then taking them down. His eyes sharpened when I mentioned the name Black Cat. You're sure one of them is called Black Cat? Yes, sir. Excellent. Take these 2 away immediately. Everyone else, tear this place apart. Don't miss a single corner. The soldiers dragged the hunched spy and the tall one out. The spy shot me a venomous look as he passed. I ignored him. The officer studied me with new interest. Ever thought about joining the army? A man who can take down 2 trained agents alone. We could use you. I shook my head. I have younger siblings at home who depend on me. I can't leave them. If my father were still alive, maybe I would have considered it. But that door had closed years ago. It wasn't just about my siblings. It was about the path I'd chosen. Joining the army would serve the country, yes, but I believed industrial development mattered more in peacetime. I'd been reborn into this era with real talent. If I couldn't contribute something meaningful to the nation's growth, then all those years of education in my previous life would have been wasted. The officer looked disappointed but unsurprised. Before he could say more, soldiers burst out of the house cheering. They'd found a hidden room, guns, ammunition, a crate of gold bars, and 2 radio transmitters. The officer's eyes went wide. "Show me." He turned back to me. "Kid, go home. I'll send someone with your reward in a few days." Then he rushed inside, without waiting for an answer. I left quickly. Some things are better unseen. The streets were quiet and cold. When I reached the courtyard, Edgar was about to lock the gate. I called out just in time. He asked why I was so late. I told him I'd enrolled in night school and hurried past. Behind me, I could practically hear his brain working. Edgar knew that night school was created for government cadres. A worker attending it would seem strange. By the time I reached the back court, he was probably already sitting on his bed, calculating what my enrollment meant and how he could use it. Sure enough, though I didn't know it then, Edgar told his wife that night that I might have become a factory cadre. She was shocked. He told her to start building relationships with Daniel, Tommy, and Lily. "We missed our chance with Jack," he said, "but those 3 are still young enough. If we're good to them now, Jack won't refuse us when we need something later." Always scheming, that man. Always regretting that he hadn't backed my family when we needed it. I pushed open my door and found all 3 kids in the living room, nodding off in their chairs, fighting sleep. Daniel's eyes snapped open the moment he heard me. "You're back. Have you eaten?" "Not yet." Something came up. I looked at Tommy and Lily, barely conscious, heads bobbing. "Why aren't they in bed?" Daniel rolled his eyes. I tried. "They refused to sleep until you came home." I reached for his head, and he swatted my hand away. "Don't mess up my hair." I did it anyway, grinning, until he gave up resisting. I scooped up Lily and nudged Tommy awake. "Come on, bed." He rubbed his eyes and mumbled, "You're finally home." I'm so sleepy. I carried Lily upstairs and guided Tommy to his room. As I turned to go back down, Daniel called after me. "Your dinner's in the pot, but we're almost out of flour and rice. I'll buy more tomorrow. Now sleep." In the kitchen, I found 3 mixed flour buns, stir-fried greens, and corn porridge. Simple, but the buns were noticeably better than Daniel's first attempt. Still a bit hard, but the taste was right. Harry must have coached him. The vegetables were slightly overcooked, but overall a real improvement. I sat there eating in the quiet house, thinking about Daniel's determination to help, Tommy's honest appetite, Lily's stubborn refusal to sleep without me. A warmth filled my chest that had nothing to do with the food. These 3, they were the reason I kept pushing forward. They always had been. After dinner and dishes, I lay in bed reviewing the day. My study plan was coming together. I'd pick up the high school textbooks from the principal tomorrow, then self-study at home. The Russian notebook was finished. I'd ask Principal Yin for next steps. The mechanical design book was 2/3 done. Electrical engineering books would have to wait until I'd digested everything else. I thought about Dennis and Luke from night school. Both seemed to come from decent backgrounds based on how they dressed and talked, but it was too early to judge their character. Then my mind drifted to the spy encounter. In hindsight, it had been reckless. When I'd impersonated Black Cat and knocked on that door, only my martial arts instincts saved me from getting shot. If something had happened to me, my siblings would have been alone in a courtyard full of people I didn't trust. I shuddered. "Think before you act," I reminded myself, and fell asleep. With Daniel handling meals now, my mornings got easier. His cooking was improving, not great, but edible. Harry was coaching him in the evenings, and it showed. 2 months flew by. It was June 1951. Big things happened nationally. In May, our forces launched the 5th campaign in Korea, a brutal push across the 38th parallel to pressure the Americans into peace talks. The fighting was horrific. Even the legendary commander wept. That was the famous Battle of Chorwan. Then on May 23rd, Tibet was peacefully liberated. When the news reached the city, people poured into the streets celebrating. Workers left their machines to cheer and hug strangers. Louis gave everyone a day off. Back in the courtyard, the Jia family started looking for a wife for Derek. Word about my night school enrollment spread across the neighborhood. I ignored all of it. I'd finished the mechanical design book and moved on to electrical engineering, specifically high-voltage systems. China's high-voltage infrastructure was decades behind America's. The mill ran on 110 kilovolts, while the Americans had been using that standard since 1908. Since steel mills depended heavily on high-voltage power, I needed to understand it deeply. I'd also breeze through the high school curriculum in a few days and set it aside. Too easy. My real education was happening through the technical books. One evening I came home to find Edgar's wife waiting at the gate. "Jack, you have visitors, family from the countryside." I hurried to the back court and saw a weathered man in gray cloth squatting by my door, smoking a pipe. My heart leaped. Uncle Nathan. It was my father's younger brother, my second uncle, Nathan Zhou. I pulled him to his feet, scolding him for not sending a telegram so I could meet him at the station. He rolled his eyes. "Waste money on a telegram? Our village isn't that far, and I'm not so old I can't find your house." I could tell he thought I'd gotten too talkative. When I was younger, he could tease me to tears with a single sentence. Now I wouldn't stop fussing over him. I unlocked the door, sat him down, poured warm water, and started asking questions. "How are Grandpa and Grandma? I heard the village got land in the redistribution. How much did our family get? You remodeled the house?" Uncle Nathan didn't answer my questions. He was too busy staring at everything. $300 million for this renovation. Isn't that a bit much? His face twitched with pain when I told him the cost. In the countryside, that would build a whole house. But I assured him it was fair for the city, and he let it go, though he muttered something about me being wasteful. I gave him the full tour. He tried to hide how impressed he was, but his eyes gave him away. When we sat back down, I asked again about my grandparents. "They're fine. The village has your uncle looking after them." He took a sip of water. "But it's been half a year since you visited. They miss you and the kids. School break is coming. Can you at least send the little ones back for a while? And if you can take a few days off yourself, even better." The image of my grandparents' kind, wrinkled faces hit me, and my nose stung. "I'll bring them all back personally once school lets out. I promise." Uncle Nathan exhaled with relief. "Good. Now I can face the old folks when I get home." He explained that since my father's death, I'd become my grandparents' favorite, the eldest grandchild, their precious one. If he returned empty-handed, they'd make his life miserable. The kids burst through the door. "Uncle Nathan!" All three mobbed him. Lily practically climbed into his lap. He squeezed her nose and grinned at Daniel and Tommy. "Daniel, keep your uncle company. I'm going to buy something good for dinner." Uncle Nathan tried to refuse, saying he needed to head back. I pushed him into his chair. "You're not leaving without staying the night. Daniel, don't let him escape." I rushed to the market. In the middle court, I passed Henry and Derek huddled together talking. Henry greeted me pleasantly. I told him my uncle was visiting and hurried on. Henry watched me go and sighed quietly. I could feel it without looking. Then he turned back to Derek and handed him money for a date with some girl named Dongmei, the daughter of a Workshop 3 supervisor. He told Derek not to be cheap this time. Derek's mother appeared the second he got home, asking if Henry had given him cash. That woman had a sixth sense for money. Derek denied it and collapsed on his bed. She lectured him about how Henry's salary was $60,000 a month and he could afford to share. In her mind, since Henry was counting on Derek for old age care, funding his son's marriage was only fair. I knew none of this. I was already home with a chicken, a pound of celery, and a pound of pork. Neighbors watched me pass with hungry eyes, especially Edgar's family, but nobody dared say anything. In the kitchen, I used up the last of our white flour mixed with corn flour and steamed 30 buns. Then I started cooking. The smell of frying pork and braised chicken filled the entire courtyard within minutes. Tommy came running before I even called. "Smells amazing." I flicked his forehead and told him to carry the dishes out. Daniel appeared next, watching me cook with longing in his eyes. "When will you teach me to cook like this?" "When we go to Grandma's house for vacation. I'll teach you there, not here." Cooking meat dishes regularly in this courtyard would attract too much attention. But back in the countryside, away from prying neighbors, I could teach him everything without worrying about who was watching. Uncle Nathan ate until his belly was round and his chin was shiny with grease. When he caught the kids staring at him, he looked embarrassed. I stepped in. "What are you looking at?" Eat your food. The three of them giggled and went back to their meals. Full? I asked him. More than full. Honestly, I had no idea you could cook like this. Even restaurant chefs couldn't match it. Tommy couldn't help himself. Uncle Nathan, Harry says Big Brother's cooking is as good as Master Lou's at the Typhoon restaurant. I shot Tommy a look and he ducked his head. But the damage was done. Uncle Nathan's eyes went wide. Master Lou was legendary across the whole region. I downplayed it, saying Tommy was exaggerating and I just had a bit of natural talent. Uncle Nathan studied my face, then looked at Tommy's wounded expression and wisely said nothing more. After dinner, Daniel led the younger two in cleaning up while Uncle Nathan and I talked. I asked about the land distribution. 10 acres, he said, lighting his pipe. That much? He gave me a look. Some villages got 2 acres per person. Ours has more people than land. 1 acre each is decent. He blew out a smoke ring. I actually wanted to transfer your household registrations back to the village so we'd qualify for more land. Your grandparents stopped me. I felt a wave of relief I couldn't show. I knew what was coming. The land would eventually be collectivized, but urban registration would become priceless. If Uncle Nathan had moved us back, we'd have been trapped. My grandparents had saved us without even knowing it. My heart ached with gratitude and longing for them. Uncle Nathan stayed the night. The next morning, I skipped cooking. We were out of white flour. I slipped out to a bun shop outside the courtyard, bought a dozen meat buns, and smuggled them home in my backpack to avoid the neighbors' hungry eyes. 2 for each sibling, 10 for Uncle Nathan to take home. After seeing him and the kids off, I headed to the factory. My machining skills had reached a new level over these past months. I could feel the edge of a breakthrough, a ceiling I was pressing against. I was deep in concentration when a scream ripped through the workshop. Help! Joaire's hand got caught in the machine. Everyone shut down their lathes and ran. I pushed through the crowd and saw a young worker in blue coveralls lying on the floor, clutching a mangled stump where his arm used to be. His face was white as paper. Blood pooled beneath him. He was fading fast. I leaned over to William and whispered a few words. He nodded immediately and took charge. Stop standing around. Someone get the foreman. The rest of you, carry him to the hospital. Now. Another senior machinist backed him up. Within seconds, order returned. One worker sprinted for the foreman's office. Several others lifted Joair onto their backs and ran for the gate. The remaining workers stood in stunned silence, then began talking in low voices. Poor guy. His whole family depends on his salary. Without an arm, he can't do machinist work anymore. What's he going to do? It's his own fault. He didn't check his machine before starting. The lathe malfunctioned, and he didn't catch it. Even logistics work requires reading and writing. And the pay is terrible. He'll probably have to leave the factory entirely. The foreman arrived minutes later, drenched in sweat. Who? What happened? William stepped forward and gave him the full report. The foreman arrived panting, wiping sweat from his face. How could Joair be so careless? He's making trouble for me. Then he turned serious. Was it his fault or the machine's? William paused. I don't know yet. I sent him to the hospital before investigating. Everyone went quiet. The answer mattered enormously. If Joair caused it himself, the factory would pay a small settlement, maybe 3 or 4 million, and offer him a desk job. But if the machine malfunctioned, the factory owed much more. Full medical costs, living expenses for his family, and support for his children until they were old enough to inherit his position. The new labor insurance regulations passed in March had made everything legally binding now. Factories couldn't just handle injuries however they pleased anymore. The foreman's face went pale. He and William rushed to the hospital. Shortly after, investigators came to examine the machine. The verdict: operator error. Joair hadn't checked his lathe before starting work. By the time I got home, the story had mutated into a dozen wild versions. Some people said Joair did it on purpose so his son could take his job. Others claimed he was trying to scam the factory. There was even a conspiracy theory about someone sabotaging his machine. The gossip was so elaborate it could rival a palace drama. A neighbor from the front court grabbed me. Is it true he did it for the money? Or was he set up? I told him flatly it was just an operating mistake and to stop spreading nonsense. He grinned and wandered off. I knew my words would become yet another version of the story within the hour. At home, I sat by the window feeling shaken. Joair's screams, the blood pooling on the floor, his white face, it stayed with me. The steel mill was heavy industry. Accidents happened every year. I'd heard the statistics before, but seeing it with my own eyes was completely different. Life was fragile. Maybe I should do something about this. I'd been thinking about it for a month already, modifying the factory's aging lathes. Years of wear had made them dangerous. But I'd held back for two reasons. First, the factory was still privately owned, and I didn't want to hand Louis an advantage in his negotiations with the government. Second, I knew Soviet experts would arrive within months to help modernize our industry, and I didn't want my work credited to them. But now, after today, I wasn't sure I could wait. A few more months meant a few more chances for someone to get hurt or killed. I decided to ask William's opinion tomorrow. This was too big a decision to make alone. I shook it off and opened my books. Within minutes, I was lost in electrical engineering. Knowledge flooded my mind. My hidden ability was firing again, filling my mental workspace with circuits, wiring diagrams, and hands-on techniques I'd never physically practiced but now understood instinctively. Half an hour later, the kids came home. Daniel saw me reading and silently hushed the other two. He went straight to the kitchen and started cooking. He'd gotten much better over the past weeks, efficient, organized. But when he opened the flour bin, it was empty. I'd forgotten to buy more. He sighed and made corn buns instead. When he called me for dinner, I saw the table and slapped my forehead. Cornmeal buns, pickled vegetables. Tommy stared at the food with open disgust. Daniel exploded. "What's that face for? Forget what we used to eat. You've been spoiled lately. Don't want it." "Then go hungry." Tommy shrank. I didn't say anything. "Enough," I said quietly. "Everyone eat." I picked up a corn bun and bit into it, feeling a stab of guilt. My little brother's disappointment was my fault. I'd been so absorbed in my books that I'd forgotten to feed my family properly. After dinner, I checked the sky, still light enough. I told the kids I was going out to buy flour and rice, then headed for the grain shop. In the middle court, I ran into Harry coming home with a mesh bag. He offered to lend me some flour, but I turned him down. I'd been leaning on him too much lately, and human debts are the hardest kind to repay. What I didn't see was what happened after I left. Harry got home to find Rain waiting for him, eyes locked on his bag. He'd brought back 2 containers of meat dishes from a private banquet he'd catered, braised tofu with pork and shredded pork in garlic sauce. Rain clapped her hands. Then Harry shushed her before the neighbors could hear. Peter asked if the client had been generous. Harry glared at him. Are my skills not worth 2 dishes of meat? He was getting increasingly frustrated with Peter's bluntness. Sometimes he wished he could trade his son for one of my siblings, Daniel, Tommy, even little Lily. Everyone in the neighborhood praised my brothers and sister for being polite, hardworking, and smart. Peter just picked fights and said things that made Harry want to strangle him. Then Peter mentioned something interesting. The Typhoon restaurant, where he'd been apprenticing, was caught up in a labor dispute. Several head chefs had teamed up with the new union representatives to pressure the owner for better pay. Harry's expression changed. He'd heard rumors, but hadn't paid attention. Now it sounded more serious. After a pause, he asked Peter something unexpected. "What if I told you to quit Typhoon and come work at the steel mill with me?" Peter stared at him like he was crazy. "The factory cafeteria? You think I can develop real skills there?" Harry hit him. Peter threatened to hit back. The usual. Meanwhile, I'd reached the grain shop just as the clerk was sweeping up to close. He saw me and dropped his broom. Looking for grain, I checked the blackboard prices. Rice was $1,600 per gene, wheat flour was $880, and cornmeal was $130. Peanut oil had gone up to $8,000 per gene. 10 gene of rice, 10 gene of flour, 20 gene of cornmeal, and 10 gene of peanut oil. The clerk filled my bags without hesitation. The total came to 105,900 yuan. I paid, hoisted the heavy bags over my shoulder, grabbed the oil jug, and walked home through the quiet streets. Back home, I poured the rice and flour into the bins, stored the oil, and checked on the kids, all doing homework quietly. I read until my eyes burned, then tiptoed upstairs to confirm everyone was asleep before turning in myself. The next morning at the factory, people were still buzzing about Joe Ayer's accident. I ignored the gossip, went straight to my lathe, and focused. With my current skill level, I finished a full day's work before lunch. Over the meal, I told William about my idea to modify the factory's aging machines. He listened carefully, then shook his head. "Your heart's in the right place. But can you guarantee the modifications will work? And even if you can, these machines belong to Louis. Damaging one costs him real money. You think he'll let you experiment? He was right. In this era, with foreign blockades on equipment, every lathe was irreplaceable. Lewis was a businessman. He'd never risk a machine on an unproven idea from a 17-year-old, no matter how talented. And honestly, I didn't want to give Lewis extra leverage before the inevitable public-private merger anyway. You're right, Master. I was thinking too simply. He patted my shoulder. I believe you could do it. But the consequences of failure aren't something we can afford. I let it go. The timing wasn't right. Not yet. After work, I headed to the night school for my monthly exam. Principal Yin had promised I could self-study as long as I passed his tests. When I walked into his office, I found him chatting and laughing with a thin, scholarly-looking old man I didn't recognize. Come here. Meet my old friend, Principal Albert from the Beta-affiliated high school. Pleased to meet you, sir, I said with a bow. Principal Albert studied me. So this is the prodigy you've been bragging about. Principal Yin coughed. Bragging? When did I brag? You came to my office last month showing off about your brilliant new student. You even asked me for a set of first-year high school exams to test him. Ring any bells? Principal Yan's face went red. He glared at me for smirking. Then he recovered and spread his hands. Well, how did he score on that test? Albert's expression softened as he looked at me. If he really answered that paper himself, perfect score on a high school exam, with no formal schooling, then his learning ability is extraordinary. I've seen gifted students before, but self-taught to this level is genuinely rare. Principal Yin beamed with pride, a side of him I'd never seen. He was always so stern with me. Seeing him show off like a proud father in front of his friend was almost funny. Albert wasn't about to let him gloat. But can he do it again? My teacher's smile froze. He turned to me with a look that was half challenge, half threat. Well, can you pass this time? Because if you can't, don't expect any more favors from me. Just like that, he dumped all the pressure on my shoulders. But I had my previous life's education, weeks of self-study, and my Russian was catching up thanks to his notebook. Political theory had improved under his guidance too. I'm ready, teacher. Good. He turned to Albert. Give him the papers. Albert pulled several exam sheets from a black folder. Principal Yin handed them to me. I sat down at a desk, picked up a pen, and started writing. When I looked at the exam papers, I nearly choked. These weren't first-year high school tests. They were third-year finals. I glanced back at the two old men whispering and chuckling behind me. My teacher had apparently bet his friend that I could handle anything, and now I was paying the price. The difficulty was real. Third-year material was far denser than first year. If I hadn't been a college student in my previous life, I might have actually failed. I pushed through. Chinese took 30 minutes, then math, then the rest. The office went silent. Both old men stopped talking and came to stand behind me, reading over my shoulder. By the time I finished every paper, it was fully dark outside. I set the stack down and barely got to say goodbye before four hands snatched the papers away. Principal Yin waved me off without looking up. Principal Albert didn't even acknowledge my existence. His eyes were glued to my answers. On the stairs, I bumped into Director Yun carrying a pile of exam papers for the regular night school students. He smiled and asked if I just finished my test. I nodded and hurried home. Walking through the dark streets, I realized I desperately needed a bicycle. The half-hour walk each way was eating into my time. And I remembered that rationing would start around 1955. After that, buying anything without a ticket would be nearly impossible. I should also pick up a watch and an alarm clock while I still could. At the courtyard gate, Edgar was locking up. I greeted him politely, something I wouldn't have done a few months ago. But his wife had been quietly looking after my siblings lately, and I appreciated it. Night school again? He asked with a friendly smile. Yes. Good night, Mr. Edgar. He didn't try to hold me up or ask for favors. Just smiled and let me go. That was unusual. The old Edgar would have tried to squeeze something out of the interaction. What I didn't know was that Edgar went inside glowing with satisfaction. He told his wife that my greeting proved their strategy was working. Months ago, he'd told her to be kind to Daniel, Tommy, and Lily, build goodwill through the children since he'd burned his bridge with me directly. His wife had actually grown genuinely fond of my siblings, finding them more likable than her own boys. Edgar was already dreaming about the day I'd owe him a favor, maybe getting his eldest son a factory job someday. Always calculating, that man. But at least his calculations had made my siblings' lives a little easier, so I couldn't complain. At home, dinner was waiting, warm buns, and stir-fried cabbage. Daniel had timed it perfectly. The food was simple, but each meal he made was better than the last. I ate quickly, washed my dishes, and went upstairs. Daniel was still reading by the dim light of his desk lamp. He looked relieved when he saw me. "You're back. Tommy and Lily asleep?" "Yes." I ruffled his hair. He swatted my hand away with a look of long-suffering patience. "Why do you keep doing that?" I grinned and told him to sleep. He closed his book, still pretending to be annoyed, but I could see the warmth underneath. He was growing up fast, taking on cooking, watching over the younger two, waiting up for me every night. He decided on his own to share the weight of this family. Walking back downstairs, I felt that familiar warmth in my chest. In my previous life, money had eroded so many family bonds. People turned on siblings over inheritance, cut ties over debts. But here, in this small renovated house in the back court of a crumbling courtyard, four orphans were holding each other up with nothing but love and corn buns. That kind of closeness felt almost sacred, something I knew I'd never take for granted. Back in my room, I read until my eyes burned, then folded the page corner and went to sleep. Tomorrow was Sunday, my day off, so I didn't set any alarm. I woke naturally to a quiet courtyard. Most factory workers were resting, and even the children had been shooed outside to play. I went to a breakfast shop outside the gate and bought 3 portions of bean juice and 15 fried dough sticks. 3 portions, not 4. I simply couldn't stomach the sour fermented taste of Beijing-style bean juice. In my previous life, I was from Shaanxi province, and some things your palate never forgives. The kids ate happily while I chewed my oil sticks dry. I told Daniel to keep everyone home doing homework while I went out on an errand. Lily looked up with hopeful eyes. "Can I come?" "Not today, but when summer break starts, I'm taking all of you to Grandma's house." Her little face fell, but she didn't cry or fuss. She just nodded and went back to her food. That quiet acceptance always hit me harder than tears would have. I grabbed 4 million from my hidden stash and headed out. In the front court, I ran into a woman in her 50s, Auntie Lou, the neighborhood matchmaker, walking in with a pretty girl of about 17 or 18. "Heading out, young Jack?" she asked with a warm smile. I glanced at the girl behind her. "Is she here for Derek's matchmaking?" "That's right. His mother asked me yesterday." "But wait." Her eyes sparkled with sudden interest. "Aren't you about the right age too? How about I find someone for you?" My face went hot. The 1950 marriage law set the minimum age for men at 20. I just turned 18. "I'm way too young for that." "You'd better hurry. Derek's mother is probably pacing a hole in her floor." I practically ran out of the courtyard. I could hear Auntie Lou calling after me, but I didn't look back. Behind me, the girl asked quietly, "Who was that?" "Him? That's Jack Zhou, youngest senior machinist at the steel mill. Makes nearly 800,000 a month." Auntie Lou gave the girl a knowing look. Interested, the girl's cheeks flushed. No, but I could understand why she'd asked. I knew I wasn't bad-looking. Sharp eyebrows, decent features, and the bookish air that came from constant studying apparently added something. Not that I spent any time thinking about my appearance. "Forget about him, dear," Auntie Lou said gently. "He's out of our league. Come on, let's go meet the Jia family." The girl went quiet and followed. Once I was safely outside the gate, I slowed down and let out a long breath. Auntie Lou had genuinely startled me, but I had to admit, just for a second, the idea of someone caring about me that way had made my heart skip. Before my promotion, I'd never thought about marriage. My salary barely covered school fees, my grandparents' monthly allowance, and keeping 4 mouths fed. But now, with 800,000 a month, the pressure had eased. Maybe it was time to start thinking about it. My mind drifted to the girl Auntie Lou had brought for Derek's matchmaking. I knew from the show that Derek would end up marrying a country girl named Sophia Chinhuiru. People judged her harshly, but I saw things differently. After Derek died, she raised 3 children and cared for his mother alone on a level 1 worker's salary. She did what she had to do to survive. Under different circumstances, with a husband who didn't die young, she'd make a perfectly good wife. And she was beautiful, which I'll admit mattered to me. I caught myself actually considering going to the countryside to find her. But I shook the thought away. Too soon for that. I took a bus to Wangfujing Street, the oldest commercial district in the city. My mission today? A bicycle. The shop was packed with more models than I'd expected. A clerk approached me immediately. "Looking for a bike? Flying Pigeon brand. Do you have one? Right this way." He led me to a whole row of them. Solid construction, clean welds, nothing fancy but built to last decades. The price, 1,500,000 yuan. Fair. I knew prices wouldn't change much even in later years. I paid, had them install a headlamp, got my receipt, and wheeled it out. Next door, I spent 900,000 on a Shanghai brand mechanical wristwatch. Then I climbed on the bicycle and started riding home. The stares were immediate. Pedestrians stopped and watched me pass with open envy. A bicycle in 1951 was like driving a luxury car in my previous life. I felt awkward and proud at the same time, a strange mix. To me it was just transportation, but to everyone else it was a symbol of real wealth. I stopped at the district police station to register the bike, get the frame stamped, and pick up my bicycle license. Then I pedaled toward the courtyard. I was almost home when a shout nearly made me crash. "Jack, is that a bicycle?" Peter had just come back from wrestling practice at the bridge. He stood in the alley gaping at my flying pigeon like it was made of gold. "Keep your voice down," I muttered. But it was too late. Within a minute, half the courtyard poured out of the front gate. People surrounded me, eyes shining. Edgar pushed to the front, staring at the bike with an expression of pure longing. His hand twitched like he wanted to touch it, but didn't dare. "You actually bought a bicycle?" he whispered, almost reverently. "Go ahead and touch it," I said, climbing off the bike. "It's sturdy. You won't break it." The neighbor's eyes lit up. Hands reached out from every direction. But Peter was fastest. He shoved through the crowd, grabbed the handlebars, and started pushing the bike toward the gate. "Hey, he said we could touch it, not take it," someone yelled. "Yeah, what are you doing?" Peter didn't flinch. "This is my brother Jack's bicycle. And just because he's nice enough to let you touch it doesn't mean you should. Do you know how expensive this is? Could any of you pay for it if you scratched it?" That shut everyone up. Hands retreated. He had a point. A bicycle in this era was worth more than most people earned in months. Before Peter could wheel it inside, a group of women rushed out from the middle court. "Is that your bike? Your family bought a bicycle." Harry pushed through them all. When he saw Peter with the bike, his face went dark. "Whose is that?" "It's Jack's." "Then why are you pushing it?" "Give it back before you break it." Harry shoved Peter aside and tried to hand the bike to me. I told him it was fine, Peter could play with it. Harry wouldn't hear of it. He kicked Peter toward home, muttering curses, and thrust the handlebars into my hands. I shook my head and wheeled it to the back court. The commotion had at least cleared away everyone who wanted to touch it. I'd barely locked it up when the kids came running out with rain. Tommy and Lily froze when they saw the bicycle. "Is that really ours?" "Of course it is," they cheered. Daniel stood to the side, silent, his face stormy. I knew exactly what he was thinking, that I'd been reckless with money again. I grabbed his head and ruffled his hair until he couldn't keep his serious face anymore. "Let me guess. Too wasteful, right?" He tried to squirm free. "You spent 1.5 million on something you can't eat, or, here." I dropped the key into his hand. "Take your brother, sister, and Rain for a ride around the yard. Don't leave the courtyard." His mouth opened, then closed. "Thought I do want to try it." "Then stop lecturing me." He took the key, and within seconds all 4 kids were laughing and taking turns wobbling around the yard on my new flying pigeon. I sat inside with my books, their laughter drifting through the window. At 11:30, I realized I'd lost track of time again. I cooked 3 dishes and soup, steamed a batch of buns, and called everyone in. Over in the middle court, Henry sat eating with his wife. She asked him how I could spend so much on a bicycle when it couldn't fill a stomach. "What do you expect? The kid makes good money," Henry said flatly. He was still bitter about my promotion. In his mind, I'd only been learning the trade for 2 years, too fast to be legitimate. But the factory belonged to Lewis, and if Lewis wanted to promote me, nobody could argue. Henry also knew he'd never be able to control me the way he controlled Derek. That ship had sailed the day he turned me down as an apprentice. After lunch, I sent the kids upstairs to rest and went back to my books. I'd finally finished the last of the electrical engineering texts. The moment I closed the cover, something exploded in my mind, a massive flood of knowledge pouring into my mental workspace. Wiring layouts, motor assembly, installation, calibration, fault detection, repairs, control systems, everything about electrical work, and not just current era knowledge. Some of it was from decades ahead, techniques that didn't exist yet. My head throbbed for a full minute before the pain faded. The sheer volume was staggering. I immediately looked at the wiring in my own house and spotted several problems I'd never noticed before. My brain generated 3 different redesign plans instantly. But I pushed the urge down. I'd just finished renovating. Tearing the walls open again wasn't happening, and I'd been spending too freely lately. A commotion outside pulled me from my thoughts. I opened the door and saw a group of military officers walking toward my house, trailed by half the courtyard. Edgar was leading them, pointing at my place. "This is the Zhou residence." The lead officer thanked Edgar and politely dismissed the crowd. People scattered, already whispering that I must be in trouble with the law. Once they were gone, the officer smiled at me. "We meet again." It was Chief Carson, the military commander from the night I'd caught the spies. I invited him and his 3 companions inside, apologizing for having nothing but warm water to offer. "Drop the act," Carson laughed. "You're probably not even happy to see us." His companions ribbed him mercilessly. One named Warren teased that Carson talked about me so much his wife might get jealous. Carson went pale. Apparently his wife was famously possessive. The banter flew back and forth until the most senior officer in the group, a man slightly older than the rest, cut them off with a look. He studied me calmly. "So you're Jack Show. We came for 2 reasons. First, to see if you really have 3 heads and 6 arms like Carson claims. You look normal enough," a hint of a smile. "Second, to deliver your reward." He placed a stack of cash and a small medal on the table. I looked at Carson. He nodded. I picked them up. "The money is 3 million, Carson said. "Not much. But that medal, that's a second-class merit citation. Someday, that medal will be worth far more than the money. Keep it safe." I held the medal in my palm, feeling its weight. A military merit award for a civilian who'd stumbled onto 2 spies in an alley. I thought about Black Cat's tired eyes, the raspy voice in that dark room, the gunshots I'd barely dodged. 3 million was generous. But Carson was right. The medal was the real prize. In the years to come, it could be a shield when the political winds shifted. "Thank you," I said, and meant it deeply. My hand actually trembled when Carson said that about the medal being more important than the money. I glanced nervously at the other officers. None of them corrected him. The senior officer, the one who'd silenced everyone earlier, stood up, walked over, and patted my shoulder. "I've got my eye on you, kid. Keep it up." Then he led the others out, leaving only Carson behind. I stared after them, completely lost. "Still haven't figured it out?" Carson lit a cigarette and shook his head at me. "The old squad leader practically spelled it out, and you're standing there like a fool. Makes me wonder if I was wrong to call you smart." He explained. The government was splitting the Ministry of Heavy Industry into 2 new departments. The first Ministry of Machinery and the second Ministry of Machinery. The senior officer who'd just left my house was being appointed to lead the first ministry, overseeing all civilian machinery, telecommunications, and shipbuilding across the country. I knew about this reorganization from my previous life's memories. Over the next few years, the government would create 8 separate machinery ministries to manage different branches of industry. But knowing it as history was one thing. Having the future head of the first ministry walk into my living room and tell me he was watching my career was something else entirely. Through Carson, I now had a direct connection to one of the most powerful industrial leaders in the country. I kept that thought strictly inside my head. "What about you?" I asked, noticing a wistful look on Carson's face. He smiled. "Thanks to you, actually. The military administration is dissolving at year's end, and I was supposed to return to active duty. But after the spy case, my transfer got redirected. I'm going to the railway." He laughed at his own luck. We talked a while longer, then he stood to leave. I walked him all the way outside the courtyard and watched his car drive away. Back inside the gate, neighbors stared at me with suspicious curiosity. Edgar intercepted me immediately. "What did those military leaders want with you?" "Nothing," I said, and walked past him without stopping. He wanted to call after me, but thought better of it. I could almost see the gears turning in his head. Jack Zhou knows military commanders now. Must get closer to that family. Harry stood in the middle court doorway and simply nodded at me. I nodded back and kept walking. At home, the kids had woken from their naps, roused by the visitors' voices. Daniel asked who'd come. I told him it was nothing important, sent them to wash their faces, and they went back upstairs to study without being asked. Once the house was quiet, I sat alone with my thoughts. Carson's words echoed in my mind. The machinery ministries, the coming restructuring, the public-private mergers, the pieces were falling into place faster than I'd expected. Next year, things at the factory are going to get very interesting. I murmured. I sighed, then felt the corner of my mouth lift. A spark of excitement ran through me. The era I'd read about in history books, the great industrial push, the transformation of a nation, was about to begin. And somehow, through luck, talent, and a chance encounter in a dark alley, I'd found myself connected to the people who would shape it. The fire-red era was coming, and this time, I'd be part of it.